The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, January 19th, 2023. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Adrian Hon, game designer and author of You've Been Played, how corporations, governments, and schools use games to control us all. And later in the show, Alex Sammon, politics writer at Slate, will be joining us once again to talk about Kathy Hochul's nomination fight for the chief judge in the Court of Appeals in the state of New York. And
crazy.
He's a conservative nut job, and she's acting pretty crazy herself.
Yeah.
I can say that.
A lot
She's
of
so moody. Sorry.
hard, inscrutable. Let's say.
Inscrutable, yeah. The U.S. has officially hit its arbitrary, unnecessary, self-imposed debt limit. The timer is set for a summer showdown on the debt, where Republicans will try to force cuts to Social Security and Medicare. The Oversight Committee, which is the main investigative body in the House, will now be populated by election deniers like Paul Gosar, Lauren Boebert, and Marjorie Taylor Greene. Seems problematic.
The brain trust.
Customs documents have shown that George Santos' mother, he claimed she died in 9/11, was not in the country at the time. And how many Pinocchios does he have at this point? Washington Post. But this time you can make the little Pinocchio in drag, right? 2 people tell Reuters and show photographic evidence that Santos participated in drag pageants in Brazil. Blake Masters and Carrie Lake are apparently both considering a run, again, at least in Blake Masters' case, for the Senate, this time for Sinema's seat in 2024, and I'm gonna be honest, that's more vulnerable than Kelly's. Kathy Hochul's anti-labor and anti-abortion pick for New York's top judgeship has been rejected in the state Senate Judiciary Committee, as I mentioned. More on that later in the program. DeSantis is ordering Florida's public universities to submit info to the state on care that they provide for trans people. California just joined other states to become the largest to sue pharma companies over insulin prices. Israel's Supreme Court ruled that one of Netanyahu's closest ministers is unfit to serve because of crimes he's committed. Also because Netanyahu's far-right coalition is trying to seize control of the judiciary. New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is stepping down in a surprise move. And lastly, Microsoft is laying off 10,000 workers, its largest cuts since 2014 and part of a larger trend with tech companies as another bubble looms. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome to the show, everybody. Good to see you on an Majority Report Thursday, a rainy one here in New York. But we have a big, packed show today. I wanted to make sure that we got somebody on this really insane fight in New York. And it's not niche because it's become a national story for a reason, what Kathy Hochul's trying to do here. And
yeah, I mean, elite leadership Democrats acting like basically Republicans, and I think the left wing, like DSA sort of wing, is playing an important role in fighting against this. So, I mean, I think it's important.
there's two things that have essentially changed since Cuomo was stacking the judiciary with conservatives. One, it's Kathy Hochul. She doesn't have the name Cuomo. She doesn't have the political clout. She doesn't have the decades of goodwill built up, or I should say, kind of corruption, self-dealing.
The dynasty.
Yeah, that allowed Cuomo to behave in the manner that he did. And secondly, as Matt said, the left was successful in electing strong leftists into the state Senate, and that's been incredibly important.
I think people like Alex Sammon have been the ones to point this out, but like Cuomo wouldn't have picked such a public losing fight like this. Like this sort of thing where you're putting labor on the side of the like DSA wing of the left. Like you shouldn't be doing that so publicly,
right? Like
this. Like
she does not know. She does not have his political instincts. Let's just say, and. It's also incredibly jarring after winning an election. It just makes it so clear, like you were.
Well, and how they won. In
yes.
a kind of disappointing way, it underperformed because of people like Hochul.
Right.
There's a reason she was a one-term congressperson and was picked by Cuomo essentially to be a doorstop for him as lieutenant governor.
Right.
And if he had never had the scandal, he would have kept her there for as long as he could be governor because he knew how bad of a politician she was, and she would have never gotten anywhere without his scandals.
Yes. That was on purpose.
She's handpicked successor to a disgraced politician.
I can't wait to talk about that with Alex. But for now, let's check in on Joe Manchin. Joe Manchin still at Davos, I would imagine, and this is where he's speaking with Maria Bartiromo in Switzerland. I
thought Davos was like floating in the.
I
honestly
actually always thought the same thing too. I was like, I never thought of Davos of like having a country
as
or
a
like
place,
as like possessing any sort of nationality.
Right. I mean,
it's like a Jetson style platform above Europe somewhere.
Or some sort of like FIFA like system in which there's bribery involved. How can we get Davos to our country?
Davos in Brazil in 2019.
Yeah, and displace millions of people for that purpose. Regardless, Bartiromo there, as well as the rest of business news, speaking to ghouls like Senator Joe Manchin. And here's this interview in which he is asked about the upcoming debt fight. Officially, the United States has hit its completely arbitrary debt limit point as of today, and Yellen, the Treasury, is going to shift money around until really the last minute because June is when I think the crap is going to hit the fan. Democrats would be smart to preempt that, but not in the way that Joe Manchin is suggesting here.
Welcome back. Leaders from across the world in a number of sectors gathering here in Davos to discuss issues ranging from the global economy to climate change and energy. And that extends to the halls of power
don't
in
tax
Washington.
us.
Earlier this morning, I sat down with West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin for a First on Fox Business interview about the debt ceiling, bipartisanship, and bringing back America's energy independence.
Well, we have to work together. It's bipartisan. It's always been bipartisan as far as the debt ceiling. I think what we have to do is realize that we have a problem. We have a debt problem. We're at 31.4 trillion of public debt right now. And that we all recognize how we got there, how we prevent from going further. So
all right, pause it. I'm sorry.
The trust funds.
That number.
The Medicare.
Sorry, that is, we will go back, but we just got to do a little bit of a rolling fact check here. Yeah. That number is accurate, but when he calls it a public debt, when there's that kind of debt, and by the way, the deficit's been reduced over the past year, but when there's that kind of debt, that means there's a surplus in the public sector.
Yeah.
So
a surplus that leads to things like Joe Manchin driving a $100,000 Maserati that's one of the most gas-guzzling vehicles on earth.
Yeah, and if he wanted to claw that back,
taxes.
He would suggest taxes on people like him. So it might be harder to buy a bit of a Maserati, although he'd figure it out in the end.
Yeah. I need my Maserati. We need kids to be hungrier. We need to balance his budget by making kids hungrier.
But let's be fair to him. Maybe he will suggest taxation.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Huh.
Where's my mouse? Okay, sorry.
All we're saying is, should we not make sure that we all recognize how we got there, how we prevent from going further? So let's take the trust funds, whether it's Medicare, Social Security, or Highway Trust. You can't let those go defunct as far as, and what we're saying is we have a trust act. And we would put different committees, bipartisan, bicameral committees together to look at each one of the trusts. and come up with solutions of how you fix it. We're not getting rid of anything, and you can't scare the bejesus out of people saying, we're going to get rid of Social Security, we're going to privatize. That's not going to happen. But we should be able to solidify it so the people that want to earn it know they're going to get it. And that's what we're talking about. And I've talked to Kevin McCarthy briefly about that. I'm going to spend more time to find out how we can bring things together. Then we should do that, and that guarantees it comes to the floor for a vote so the American people see that we have some solutions. It might pass and it might not. And then we should look at something. The Bowles-Simpson was a brave attempt at trying to get our finances under control. We didn't do it. That needs to come to a vote also. So we could do a hybrid of that. If we can do that and we'll say, okay, we agree to raise the debt ceiling as long as we agree to identify the debt we have and how we start reducing it.
So you feel that you can identify areas to cut in terms of wasteful spending?
Yeah. Oh, most certainly you can look at that. But basically,
yeah, this part's key, but
oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just gonna. The entire premise is like, yeah, we're spending too much. No, we're not taking in enough revenue, and people like it's so ludicrous that we have this like insane culture that glorifies wealth, right? Like all these shows about, look at me flip this house. I'm basically like a moron, but I'm in real estate now, and I sold a Beverly Hills house for a $200,000 commission, right? Like, there's money in this country.
Yeah. Also, the constant preaching about balancing your budget and being fiscally responsible from people who have lucked into millions and millions of dollars where they'll never have to actually make that kind of choice is that's something else. But so there he is suggesting essentially a bipartisan committee that he's been speaking with Kevin McCarthy on. And this is key because if the Democrats need Manchin and Sinema to hold the line on this and not cave to Republican demands, ransom for cuts to Medicare and Social Security. And yet, instead of doing what Ryan Grimm suggested and begin a process of a discharge position that would force the bill out of committee so Republicans would be unable to tank the economy or at least threaten to do so in order to get what they want, cuts to Medicare and Social Security, Manchin is proposing this. And then this is what he says and what he identifies as the flaws in the system for Medicare and Social Security.
The debt we have and how we start reducing it.
So you feel that you can identify areas to cut in terms of wasteful spending?
Oh, most certainly you can look at that. But basically you can put a system in if it's done in a bipartisan, bicameral, Democrats and Republicans in the House and the Senate working together so we know it's going to move forward or at least get a recognizing a vote on the floor. And people need to see that.
Entitlements, then cuts are off the table.
Entitlements from the standpoint, when you say entitlements, people look at that differently. They have a different termination, depending on where you come from. An entitlement, I don't look at Social Security or Medicare as entitlement. You've paid for those, okay? But on that is there ways that we can make sure that we have the finances in order to take care of it? Is there abuse in the system? The people that have earned it and paid for it, but is there other people that haven't and things of this sort? Or is the system basically flawed, hasn't been corrected? I'm willing to look at anything and everything but protecting the people in my state of West Virginia. Medicare and Social Security is a lifeline. That's the lifeline for 60% of the people. And they're hard
So I need to be
workers.
very careful about how I
They don't have
attack it.
big pensions. They don't have big retirement systems. They have this. And we're going to make sure we protect it.
But the White House says there's
all right, there we go. So, the reasons that they don't have robust pensions or retirement funds is because we could mandate those things and make them untethered to the marketplace, for example, in the United States, but we've chosen not to do that. Those kinds of funds have become more private over time. But when he says, is there abuse in the system, what he's trying to do there is claim that there is enough waste within Medicare and Social Security or Medicare fraud, things of that nature, which happens along the margins, on occasion, but fraud happens in every sector, private business as well.
Fossil fuels.
We're not having a large discussion about, say, putting the fossil fuel industry on a diet because of fraud that happens within it. That
defense
is
spending.
Yeah, of course. There has been many audits done by the Pentagon where just billions of dollars completely unaccounted for, gone, like vapor, just gone. And yet we increase their funding on a yearly basis. There's no substantial amount of fraud that would warrant the kind of scrutiny that he's describing. What we actually can do is, as we've laid out in this show already, tax. That would reduce the deficit, although I don't necessarily care about that for the reasons I described. But like, if Manchin's so concerned about it, raise taxes on the wealthy. But what we can do for something like Social Security is raise the cap, or essentially eliminate it altogether is what we should do on earned income. Because while we do have that the cap of taxable income, while that cap is tied to inflation, the rate of inflationary increase has not kept up for decades with the rate of income inequality, which has rapidly expanded. And so income inequality is outpacing the marginal small inflationary increases that are accounted for in the tax system as related to Social Security. And the payroll tax by which these programs depend on is already regressive. So the fact that earners under 160K are keeping Social Security afloat and keeping it on their backs, it only compounds the fact. So compounds that fact, I should say. Yeah. So there are so many easy solutions that we know that we can do. We did this with Medicare in the 90s. When it comes to the cap. So for Social Security in particular, there's so many easy solutions that have been tried before that we can do. The fact of the matter is that none of those enter Joe Manchin's brain, or at least he doesn't articulate them on Fox Business, because it's all working backwards to austerity. And you just how effectively can Manchin conceal that? That's the game that he's playing.
Yeah, I mean, and as far as Biden goes, there are three paths basically that I see, and two of them are acceptable. One is like our preferred policy, which is to tax the rich and get the revenue back in. The MMT folks are a little bit more avoidant of that sort of conflict, but they offer the second path, which is mint the coin. So if this actually gets pushed to the crisis, Biden, you just got to mint the coin, and we have to do this with accounting tricks. Like you can't F around with this. And the one that he cannot take is the one where we accept like a banquet of vampires to come in and decide how much they're going to bleed people, which is what Manchin wants.
And just politically, like speaking to your self-interest, there's a reason that the Republicans tried this also in 2011 when there was a Democratic president. They don't do this. They don't engage with this fight when there's a Republican president, because they make a calculation that is going to fall politically on him. So if Biden capitulates to this and gives in to these ransom demands, it's his ass too. Not that stopped the Democrats before from punching themselves in the face, but just from a self-preservation standpoint, you do not want to be the president that presides over cuts to Medicare and Social Security. No one's going to remember how this happened. They'll just remember that you were the leader when it did.
Mint the coin, Joe.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we will be joined by Adrian Hon. We are back, and we are joined now by Adrian Hon, game designer, author of You've Been Played, How Corporations, Governments, and Schools Use Games to Control Us All. Adrian, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Hi, great to be here.
Great to have you. So the term gamification, how do you broadly define it as something that's taken over so many sectors over the past few decades? I mean, rating Uber drivers is an example that you give right off the bat, but to start more broadly, how do you define that term?
Yeah, I mean, gamification is pretty broad. It basically means using ideas from game design, from video games, in non-game purposes. So maybe using ideas like badges, points, missions, levels, quests for education, for the workplace, for fitness, all sorts of things. So it's pretty broad, but I think a lot of people, when they see it, they recognize it.
And yeah, so there's some hallmarks of it: achievement points, right? Stars, or I guess different things you can accumulate, all that kind of stuff. And I mean, how is this in any way really like different, at least from the workplace side, from traditional performance review?
Yeah, I mean, workplaces, factories, a lot of institutions have always wanted to monitor workers' performance. Over the years, that's not a new thing. It's been around for centuries, if not millennia. And they've always had some way of rewarding or punishing workers for their performance. So in that respect, it's not new. I think there's kind of two things that have really changed in the last 10 to 20 years. The first part is that the level of monitoring is just much more detailed and just completely nonstop compared to the past, right? It might be that you're rated on your output over a day. They just count up how much work how many pieces you've completed in a day. Now, if you work at Amazon, if you work at Uber, a lot of companies, call centers, they can monitor your performance down to the second, and they can see, literally where you're moving, what things you're clicking. So that's kind of being able to monitor you. And I think what's interesting about gamification is how they feed back on your performance. So it used to be in the past, you get a little letter in the mail saying you need to work harder, otherwise you're fired. Or a manager might come up to you, and have a chat with you. And now, increasingly, we're seeing that kind of feedback from bosses and from management come in the form of a game, where it will say, look, you've slipped down this leaderboard, or you haven't gotten these achievements, or you have got these achievements. You're outperforming people on the factory floor. You've completed these quests, and so now you can level up. That is the difference. And so it does have similar roots to Taylorism, to other forms of management, but it's in a very different lens in terms of just how constant it is and how it's dressed up in these kind of clothes of video games.
Right. And can you expand on that fact, how it is a version of electronic surveillance, which we've talked about on this program, but there's a different layer to it. I mean, I know that you have a background as a developer, and you've made arguments for ethical gaming. So you kind of understand what these checkpoints might look like to make it a game, as opposed to just standard electronic monitoring. What are some of those indicators?
Well, I think it's a bit of a family resemblance. But one example would be, how you talk about the work, right? So instead of saying, okay, here's your assignment for today, here's your quest for today, and it is shown using kind of graphics, pixel art or achievement badges that we've seen from games. I think there are elements like competition, so where you are competing against other people, your colleagues, for space on a leaderboard. I think that there are things like joining rewards or punishments automatically to your performance. So that's kind of a big, a different thing. Usually there is some, in the past, that there's usually some sort of human manager deciding, okay, I think this person has done better or worse. Whereas in a game, of course, we're used to video games being automatic. If you fail this level, that's it. You are instantly punished or rewarded if you pass. So I think those are two kind of big parts of it. And you see that in places like Uber, where they will literally offer drivers quests periodically. And if you accept the quest, then you have to go and, that's what they call it. And you have to complete a certain number of trips and carry a certain number of passengers within a time window. And if you do that, then you get a bonus. And that sounds great. Obviously, you think, wow, who wouldn't want extra money? But if you talk to the drivers, if you see what they say, they're like, actually, the problem is that it's not really fair. A lot of the quests you go on, they feel like they're set up to fail. And that's where it becomes different from a traditional board game or video game, which is designed to be fair. With gamification in the workplace, there's no reason why it has to be fair. I mean, they can set up a quest where you're always 1 or 2 trips away from winning. And that's something we've seen people in other countries complain about, delivery drivers and gig economy workers around the world, talk about this sort of thing.
Yeah, the gig economy element is, I really think, is such an important piece because it dresses up the work in a way that obscures the lack of protections or wage increases that should be in place. But I to step back a little, I'm hoping that we could trace the origins of this, starting earlier in your book to the early 2000s when I think you and talk about Foursquare, other apps like that began this kind of trend. Take us to that point.
Yeah, I mean, gamification is kind of so pervasive now. It's hard to remember that it's actually quite new. The term really started becoming used about 15 years ago, and that is when apps like Foursquare, where people would basically check into real world locations like bars and cafes and museums to let their friends know where they've been. And by checking in, you could get points and rise up a leaderboard and get sometimes real world rewards by becoming the mayor of a location, by being a regular. And Foursquare did really well. It had lots of downloads for the time. And a lot of people thought that the reason why it was successful was because of the gamification. And so you saw a lot of other companies think, okay, well, we've got to add gamification to our product. And it's quite easy to do that because basically you're already tracking all this information, right? If you are a fitness tracker, you're already tracking people's steps. So it's not that hard to develop a system where you give people a badge or leaderboard if they walk 10,000 steps, that sort of thing. And so it started spreading everywhere, really.
Right. And when did that spread kind of begin to trickle into things like workplaces, right? And I guess it started off with a bit of a shine to a degree, right? Where people felt like there was this whole world at their fingertips, and now it's quite rapidly become, I think, an example of a sort of dystopia.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of started in two different places. The first place is really consumer tech. So like, your Fitbit or iPhone apps, things that people choose to install, things like Duolingo. And I think, the worst you can say about them is that maybe they don't work, but at least, you're choosing to go and install them. I think, after that, you started seeing a lot of people say gamification is potentially the way to, just get positive outcomes for anything. So, for example, Obama's 2008 campaign, employed a kind of gamification to encourage volunteers to, call people to get to the polls. And people say, oh, maybe gamification helped that. And so there was just this idea that gamification could be used to do good things. And of course, you had a lot of gamification consultants going around saying, oh, well, wouldn't it be great if we could make the workplace more fun and more engaging, and make workers happier and make them work harder if we took these same tools that make volunteering for political campaigns or making running more interesting and use them in the workplace. And I think people wanted to believe that was true, partly because of like a completely different thing, which is that people want to believe that video games in general are a good thing. I think, there's no mistaking the fact that over the last 10, 20 years, video games, which are already a big business, have become the biggest business in entertainment. They're bigger than Hollywood, bigger than TV, bigger than the music industry. And I think that sort of positive shine around video games has transferred to gamification. And so I think a lot of companies thought, oh, well, this is just a good thing. Why don't we deploy it? It probably doesn't cost that much, and it could save us a lot of money.
And it's one thing, as you say, if consumers are the ones being, quote, gamified, right? Where they're making these decisions, and it might not be, say, good for your brain with some of these, but and that's I'm not saying that about video games largely. I just mean something that is addictive to a degree. I don't know, but it's a whole different ballgame when it's being used essentially to discipline workers and used to obscure unethical practices by corporations and their employers.
Yeah. I don't think it's great when people sort of download a brain training app and they think it's going to make them smarter, and it doesn't. But
Right.
that's a whole different dimension to you working at a call center and having to install some software on your laptop, which means that even it takes a photo of you every 5 minutes to make sure that you're not you haven't gone away from your computer. And if you aren't there, you get docked points, and that means that you step down the leaderboards. And so I think there's kind of a to me that's not great. I think the other thing that really bothers me as a kind of game designer and just as a human is that I think a lot of people, when they get the feedback about their performance from a game, they think, if I failed, it's because it's my fault. Like, I haven't been working hard enough, or I'm not good enough. Because when you play a video game or you play a board game and you die, usually it's because, well, you just aren't good enough at the game yet, and you will get better. But as I said before, one of the problems with gamification is that there's no reason why employers have to design their systems in a fair way. They can just make it get harder and harder for everyone every week. That doesn't mean they're doing that, but there's no transparency and there's no reason for them not to do that. And that's the concerning thing.
Absolutely. And it further atomizes or sections off the worker from some sort of human manager to a degree, and it makes it makes employment decisions. I know Amazon, we'll get to them in a bit, but the way that they judge their workers' performance based on these internal algorithms might look outward facingly to the employee like a gaming system, but they're actually making quite cold-hearted decisions internally based on the data that they collect on that individual. And there's still that complete separation. It widens the gap between worker and management. Is that an accurate take largely with some of these gamification systems directed at workers?
Yeah, I mean, I think companies have always been interested in automation, in cutting costs. And I think a lot of managers just hate talking to workers because often, it's nice to give them good news. It's awful to give them bad news and to sort of, have to discipline workers. And so I think one of the things that a game does is it gives you a kind of interface as a manager, as an owner of a company, to reward and punish workers without you having to do it yourself and without you having to kind of feel even that bad about it, because you're like, well, that's just what the game does, right? And so I think it kind of meshes with the fact that a lot of people spend all their time playing games as we used to spend time watching TV. And so it kind of makes sense. It's easy to see your workers as these little kind of like non-player characters, as these just icons on a screen, and think, well, like they're just getting on with it. I don't need to worry about it. And yeah, it definitely atomizes, the community there.
We recently had a guest on who spoke about the trucking industry, written a book on the trucking industry. Can you talk about how some of these techniques are being utilized with truckers in particular?
Yeah, I mean, this has been fascinating for me. I think a lot of people look at gamification and think of the usual suspects like Amazon and Uber and high-tech industries. But, one of the things that has happened over the last 5-10 years is that basically all US truck drivers have had to install these electronic logging devices in their trucks. And the idea sounds good. It's to promote safety because they want to make sure that truck drivers aren't, driving for 24 hours straight. You've got to go and log how much you're driving and how much you're sleeping and resting using this device, and it's linked to your engine. Whereas before it was you just wrote it down in a book. And of course, after they added this requirement for truck drivers to have this, they thought, a lot of companies decided, well, if we're going to put this computer, this network connected computer into people's trucks, why don't we link it to other forms of performance monitoring? And so it was kind of like a backdoor for truck driving companies to gamify the experience of driving a truck. And so now for a lot of drivers, they're automatically given points or deducted points or given achievements depending on how well they complete, their trips, how safely they drive, all of that sort of thing. And you can look at the reviews, and you can look at some of the feedback that drivers have left on these apps. Some of them complained about the fact that they're inaccurate, and they're saying, well, this thing doesn't know whether I'm actually driving properly or not, and so I've been unfairly punished or rewarded. And other research has kind of shown that possibly it actually makes driving more unsafe, because people are really trying to meet their deadlines, and which are delivered by these devices, and which are kind of enforced by hours of service rules, and so actually people end up being more unsafe. The funniest thing about all of this is that when you look at the truck driving companies and the people who sell these devices, they will say, well, gamification, it's a great way to make driving more entertaining and more fun for millennials. And I'm like, this is bonkers. Like, just because it's called a game doesn't mean it's actually fun. But, that is definitely something that they talk about a lot.
So when talking about truckers here, I am reminded of just how rapidly workplace protections have eroded in that industry, in particular, where levels of unionization are way down from where they were decades previously, which I think is no coincidence. And you also see them in those more high-profile examples as well, where there are labor fights with mega corporations like Amazon. There was just an Uber driver strike a few weeks ago here in New York. And can you just talk more broadly about how this fits into the gig economy corporate model, one that's reliant on cheap labor, and almost the usage of this being a way to, to keep that labor force in check, while at the same time not really doing anything materially for them?
Yeah, it's it's a really interesting and sort of quite complex area, because whenever I talk about this, people are like, well, yeah, but isn't it like good for gig economy workers to have these like bonuses? It's just a way of them earning more money. In India, for example, they have this thing called Delivery Premier League, where every time you deliver something, you get like a run, like in cricket. And if you get lots of runs, and you can go and trade them in for like free motorcycles and laptops. And so it's everywhere. It's not just in the US. And I think, these sorts of incentives are really individual. They're really opaque. They rely on competition. So now you're competing against your colleagues. And they all mean that they lead to people overworking, I think, working longer than they really wanted to. That's a common theme you'll see. And also having no idea how much they're going to get paid at the end of the week.
Right.
So
it increases insecurity, and also, as you say, undermines solidarity, because when you're competing in a game, it feels like you're competing against other workers in your same situation.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that like when I notice this when workers come to these sectors. At first, they think, "Wow, this is great. The company is looking after me. They're giving me all these opportunities to earn more." And often you'll see, experienced drivers, experienced Amazon workers who'll say, "Actually, I've been here for like 6 months, for like 2 years, and it never pans out. And it's just a way to get you to work harder." And people at Uber have said, ideally, we want you to drive as much as possible, right? And we will just keep giving you more stuff. So, it's not that it's impossible to figure out a way of making gamification actually work. It's just that in practice, the company's priorities are completely different to the workers' priorities.
And just moving on a bit from the corporate model of it, you also touch on gamification within governments. You alluded to it with the campaign. I'm reminded, of course, of Hillary Clinton's infamous Pokemon Go to the polls moment. Although that was not, I don't think, either way, she just did not understand what she was doing to make it. She need to make it a little more subtle, frankly. But you cite some of China's practices in your book as well, if you don't mind expanding on that.
Yeah, I mean, China is kind of one of those places where a lot of people have heard about this Chinese social credit score. And the reality is kind of simultaneously less scary and a little bit more scary than it seems. The reality is that there is no single credit score for 1.4 billion Chinese people. It's more just a bunch of experiments in a bunch of cities where they're trying to see whether they can establish trust. It's a weird thing. They want to establish trust between citizens and between governments by scoring citizens based on how well they behave. So, if you jaywalk, or if you return a library book late, or if you do other bad things, you could get docked points. And if you do nice things like volunteer or donate blood, then you get points. And based on your point total, you can get things like lower interest loans or access to better public services. And so, when you look at what a lot of Chinese people say about this, some people are like, you know what, this sounds fine, because I don't actually like it when people jaywalk or when people kind of break the law. So if it stops people from doing that, that works. But of course, people in China are also saying, well, who decided this? It seems completely arbitrary. Why are we accepting this surveillance? They're not different from other people in other countries. So at the moment, it is not very widespread. And in a lot of places where it's been deployed, a lot of citizens have actually rebelled against it and said, actually, we don't want this. But I think the ambition is there, that they do keep on trying. And actually, during lockdowns, everyone had to install, COVID-19 apps to access different areas. And the kind of gamification piggybacked on top of that. So it's a bit worrying. But at the same time, we kind of have similar sorts of things in other countries, in the US and the UK.
Credit scores.
Scores. Yeah. I mean, and those are really important. I have private health insurance, unfortunately, in the UK, because the NHS is not doing well. And, if I buy healthy vegetables from the supermarket, I will get points. If I go to the gym, I'll get points. And the more points I have, I can save money on my premium. I can save money on going to the gym. I mean, it's real money. It's not small amounts of money. And so it's not, I think we sort of pat ourselves on the back and say, well, at least we don't have social credit score. It's like, yeah, but we kind of are being gamified in other ways. And there are real rewards and punishments, depending on how you do.
I'm real happy you brought that back to the context, because I mean, a lot of it, at least framed from a Western context, is imbued with xenophobia and things of that nature. But you do a great job of explaining just kind of how ubiquitous it is cross nationally. I wanted, before I let you go, to ask a bit about virtual reality, because this is the big pitch to investors. This is Mark Zuckerberg's new frontier. He's going to build a virtual, and I know, and look, I don't know a ton about gaming, so I apologize for sounding kind of new to this, but that's what he's trying to really incorporate with Meta, right? Even though it's been done before, they're trying to make it, that's the new pitch to investors. What's your sense of that?
Well, I mean, the tech industry wants to keep growing, and I think they want more of our lives to be mediated through the internet, through digital devices. And so whether it's the metaverse or virtual reality or augmented reality, the idea is that however much time you spend on your phone, on your computer, we want people to spend more time with virtual reality and heads-up displays. And you can imagine some ways in which that's actually useful. Like, if you go to a party and you forget people's names, as I always do, then it's kind of useful having that, or having maps and directions shown on your glasses. But of course, it would be naive to think that these wouldn't also be used for work. They wouldn't be used to monitor people in other ways. And frankly, if the last 15 years is any indication, anything that can be gamified, anything that can be measured, and tracked and sent to servers will be gamified. And I think that will be a really central way for companies, big companies and small companies, to try and manipulate people to whether that's work harder or just, behave in a certain way.
Adrian Hon, a game designer, author of You've Been Played, How Corporations, Governments, and Schools Use Game. Oh, actually, really quick question before I let you go. I'm so sorry, because the school element I wanted to touch on.
Sure.
We, in the United States, we went through a period where billionaire Bill Gates decided it was his mission to essentially make schools in his image. It was a privatization push, but also a way to make himself some more money by incorporating technology into schooling. What is some of what you've seen in your research on that front? And then I actually will let you go.
I mean, this is the most eye-opening part of the book, of my research, was this app called Class Dojo, which is used in supposedly 95% of US schools. And it is a way basically for teachers to reward and deduct points from students, during classes. And so you might think, oh, it's fine, we've done that. But actually, it's kind of, you can use it to deduct points based on whether, a student goes to the bathroom too much or talks too much or is antisocial. And the points are persistent and they can be, exchanged for prizes and rewards. And, I mean, it's kind of incredible, honestly, because some parents love it and some parents say this is just absolutely dystopian. Some teachers love it because they see it as a way of controlling the classroom, right? You can just say, all right, I'm just minusing 50 points from all of you, and that means you don't get this privilege. And it's just so much more rapid and so much more kind of visceral and scary, I think, for a lot of kids than other mechanisms before. And I think we've really got to ask ourselves, is this a way in which we want to motivate children to learn, right? Maybe it is a good way of controlling the classroom, but at the same time, studies have shown that actually, even if you motivate people to be quiet, it actually makes people less interested, kids less interested in lessons. So maybe all they're doing is just trying to maximize their points rather than, enjoy learning French or something.
Exactly. All right. Well, thank you for that last question there. Adrian Hon, game designer, author of You've Been Played, How Corporations, Governments, and Schools Use Games to Control Us All. We'll put the link to the book in the description on the podcast, YouTube, app, etc. Thank you so much, Adrian. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break and get to our second guest, Alex Sammon, who will give us the lowdown on what is happening in New York with this judge fight. Be right back. We are back. We are joined by Alex Sammon, back on the show, politics writer at Slate. Alex, thanks so much for coming on.
Hey, yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Of course. So you're here to explain this insanity in New York. Yesterday, Hochul's nominee for chief judge of the Court of Appeals in New York was actually rejected by the State Senate Judiciary Committee 10-9, so very close margins there. And this is the latest development in this saga that ranges from head-scratching on one end to infuriating on the other. I'm not sure which. We can just go with both. Why not both? But let's start from the beginning. How did Hochul get to this point, nominating this judge who has an anti-labor record, anti-abortion record, Hector LaSalle, to be the top judge in New York State, a solidly blue state?
Yeah, well, it kind of starts with the chief judge of the Court of Appeals. That's the top court in New York, Janet DiFiore, who is a true dyed-in-the-wool Cuomo loyalist. she's announced that she was stepping down, I think in August of 2022. So that was kind of a surprise. Her term was not over. It was, she was the subject of an ethics investigation and promptly decided to step aside. So she was the head of this conservative bloc on the court. There was a 4-3 conservative bloc. She steps aside. It's a huge opportunity for Hochul. I mean, it was one of those things. It was like an incredible windfall, totally unexpected, and a chance for her to turn the page on the Cuomo era, to recalibrate New York politics and kind of reset this conservative majority on the state's top court.
And can I just stop you right there, Alex? Like the reason that court was conservative was because of Cuomo's self-dealing and a variety of other favors that he had done, and it set up the electoral disaster for New York Democrats in this election cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so that court, stacked with Cuomo appointees, no surprise, very conservative, loyal to him. I mean, it's the sort of the nexus of both conservative and sort of beholden to his personal dealings. And right, they were the ones who voted down the redistricting that Democrats in the Senate had put together, and then handed over that responsibility to an out-of-state independent commissioner, which of course gave Republicans a huge advantage. That was the state court all the way, or the appeals court all the way. And that's something that really brought a lot of attention to this court. I think, part of the reason it's surprising maybe that we're even talking about this. Part of the reason we're talking about this is because that was such a disastrous outcome. It was such a crushing blow to Democrats in New York and nationally that the court became, an object of a lot of attention and a lot of scrutiny. And that's a recent change. When Cuomo was stacking the court in the first place, there wasn't a lot of pressure or pushback.
So, right, exactly. And now it's had ramifications, and that's what makes it even more shocking that the new leader of the Democrats in the House, despite this directly leading to Democrats losing seats in the House, you could potentially pin them losing the majority on it, given how terrible the results were in New York State. Despite that, Hakeem Jeffries has gone to bat for this nominee, Hector LaSalle, alongside Kathy Hochul. So who is this guy? What is his record? Why are progressives upset about it? And if you don't mind just expanding on that.
Yeah, totally. It's like one of those decisions that's so confounding, especially after this election cycle. It's like New York Democrats have not just learned nothing, they've learned less than nothing. So LaSalle, so Hochul has recommended a slate of 7 possible nominees. There's a commission that has to recommend a handful of judges for this position to her, and she picks from one of them. So she got 7 of them. And among the nominees were a handful of I think, really extremely qualified judges, people who have a record in New York, come from backgrounds that you consider diverse, professionally diverse, which is something that the Biden administration has really championed. And she picks Hector LaSalle. And I think if you want to be the most charitable to her, you would say, well, she picked LaSalle because there's a lack of Latino representation at the highest echelons of power in New York. She wanted to do something about that. But that's pretty much where I think the charity ends, because, of course, if you did any vetting at all, you would have quickly found out that he was involved in a handful of decisions that were going to infuriate the most important constituencies in Democratic politics in New York. And I should say that Hochul has a history of being very, very bad at vetting. It's her lieutenant governor, when she took over for Cuomo, her second in command, Brian Benjamin, was someone who a lot of people said you got to be careful about. There are rumors about him. And then 9 months later, there were charges brought against him by the federal government, and he had to step down. And it's just one of these things where it's like their ideology is something, and I wouldn't be surprised if she wanted a right wing or fairly right wing court, just like Cuomo had. But at the same time, it's like her vetting process has been called into question more than once. And I think that there are these handful of decisions I think we'll probably talk about in greater detail that were obviously going to be huge problems for New Yorker, for Democratic New Yorkers, and not even just for progressives, for pretty moderate groups that are behind things like organized labor and women's health and criminal justice reform.
If you don't mind, just talking a bit about those cases in particular. I mean, I I mean, there's also he had this inexplicable record when he signed off on this on dismissing jurors based on their skin color as well. That's just one element. But his record is basically pretty sparse, except for some of these extreme examples that I'm sure you can dive into.
Right. So what was interesting in the hearing that we saw yesterday was, despite, LaSalle is a high-ranking judge, he hasn't written a ton of opinions. So there actually isn't a lot out there to judge him on. But what we do have to judge him on, and what the Senate Judiciary Committee had to judge him on, is like a handful of really alarming decisions. And so one of them, as you mentioned, it was brought up repeatedly in these hearings, was this decision where a prosecutor pushed to throw out potential jurors on the basis that they were dark-skinned, and LaSalle basically blessed that decision and found that dark skin was not a protected group in the Constitution. That it didn't rise to the level of constitutional protections against discrimination based on race or anything else, which is obviously wild. And of course, the Court of Appeals, which he's trying to get onto, overturned that immediately because it was so glaring and ridiculous. So that was one thing that criminal justice advocates were, totally galled by. The next case that came up a lot was this case, shorthand is called Cablevision, and it was a decision that he gave that was a devastating blow for organized labor, because it basically allowed companies to sue labor organizers for being critical of the company. And so, it just blows a massive hole in the protections that exist for organizers to court new union chapters and to set up union drives. And this was another one that organized labor right away was like, this was a horrible decision for us. It was catastrophic. And there's just no way that we can get behind that. And that was, a huge blow for this nominee as well, because once organized, it's one thing for the DSA adjacent state senators in New York to say, well, we don't support someone who has this record on racial justice, who has this record on various other things. It's another thing for the state's unions to say, look, there's absolutely no way we're doing this. And they came out pretty quickly, which gives you a sense that Hochul very likely never even called them and said, hey, what do you think about this? Because the day that the announcement dropped, they were out saying that we're not behind this and we won't be, which gives you a sense of just how poorly managed this whole thing was.
Yeah, she's just not a good politician. I mean, that's a huge miscalculation. And say what you want about Andrew Cuomo, and we could say a lot, right? At the very least, he knew which I was going to say palms to grease, but that's a mixing of metaphors, I guess, right? Or is that correct?
No, I think that's right.
He knew which.
It's correct. It's like, right, yeah. He did all sorts of, his dealings are obviously infamous and well known at this point, but he didn't lose a lot of these. He didn't go on these bullying sprees and these vengeance campaigns and do this horse trading and stuff and come away with nothing. He won those fights if he decided to get into them. And so that's actually, I think, a really interesting point of comparison is, we don't really know who Hochul is because she hasn't been in the spotlight very long. She just got elected for the first time a couple months ago, and barely at that. We haven't seen her in action. And this is the first time where she's really tried to use political capital to get something she wanted. Why it's something she wanted, we have no idea. Well,
that's what I want to ask you next. It's like, what the hell is this? What's the point? I mean, it's almost like she's trying to do certain the Cuomo politics, right? But there was always kind of an end to Cuomo's politics, which is solidifying his own power. Is it that simple? And she's just bad at it? I mean, what's this is conjecture, I know, but what's your sense of why the hell she's doing this?
Yeah, I guess I can sort of give you a best guess based on all the conversations I've had with people involved in the process. And I think it's a combination of things. I think that, yeah, right, Cuomo had this thing which was shoring up his own power by any means necessary. That's something of an ideology in itself. And I don't think Hochul really has a strong ideology. I think that she made this pick. I think that the fact that it was someone who was a little bit more conservative was probably preferable for her. And then I think she didn't do a lot of vetting. And when she got crossed by a bunch of senators, in effect, and labor groups and everyone else who said this is a terrible pick that we won't support, I think that she tried to pick up the old Cuomo playbook and say, I'm going to force this through. You better not cross me. And the sort of like willingness to battle with the left in New York State is, that's the go-to Cuomo approach. And I think she learned a lot of those things from her old boss. I don't know why she wouldn't have. But you see it exactly. It's like in that hearing, the Republicans were praising LaSalle for his character and his hard work and his like willingness to accept this incredibly important position. And almost every Democrat, except for 2 or 3, were very hostile to him. And this is a nominee by a Democratic governor. I mean, it was like one of those things you would never know unless you've been reading about it, what was going on. And I think that, Hochul kind of went back to the Cuomo playbook and was like, all right, we'd rather fight the left than fight the right. We are going to use these tactics that Cuomo became so infamous for to ram this thing through. And the problem is, that I don't think she has the muscle. I mean, we can see it now, obviously, based on the result, but she doesn't have the muscle to do it because she doesn't have a lot of political capital built up.
She doesn't have the IDC. I mean, that was for people that might not know what that is. That was a caucus of Democrats who basically Cuomo relied upon to stamp out any progressive legislation because they voted with Republicans basically all the time in exchange for personal favors and power. And since really, I think Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and like Trump also elevating the level of political consciousness in the country, New York State galvanized with the help of DSA, which has been, very successful in New York State, getting progressives in those seats and ousting the IDC. And you see the tangible results right now, right here, with the pushback internally in the Senate and also the vote, which shot him down in the Judiciary Committee. However, though, that might not be the end of the fight, right, Alex?
Right, absolutely. So Hochul has already said that this hearing was unfair and that she was willing to sue the Democratic caucus in the Senate to override this decision and to get LaSalle to a full Senate vote. And she's actually retained counsel to do it. So, it's a shocking move because, right, you'd say, okay, Hochul barely won her election campaign. She won by 5 points in New York, where, Democrats, registered Democrats outnumber registered Republicans 2-1 in the state. So that's a horrible performance. And, a lot of people in New York politics would say that she dragged them down the ballot. Like if you were a state senator or a legislator or anybody else, you would say, well, it was almost impossible to run with Hochul at the top of the ticket because she was such a bad candidate and she hurt everyone. So already the party is feeling like we don't owe Hochul anything. If anything, she owes us. And then she picks someone that they don't want. And they didn't want this fight, to be fair. Like the state Senate, Democrats in the state Senate didn't want this. They weren't saying like, bring it on. We're going to show Hochul who runs this show. They were like, please pick somebody else. Like just withdraw the pick and pick somebody else. And she wouldn't do it. And so now she's threatening to sue them. And it seems like that's a pretty legitimate threat. I mean, there's been plenty of indications that she feels like this is a legitimate course of action that she may well pursue. And again, it's like, do we think that she has enough votes in the broader Senate to get this nominee through? I don't think so. I mean, I've just a quick count. I don't see the math there either. And so it's one of these. I mean, it's one of these things where it's like, the simplest, like almost you would say like the most sort of I'd say corrupt, but the sort of like horse trading measure of politics here would be like, okay, I got elected because these, women's groups and organized labor put a lot of effort into getting me across the finish line and I barely survived. I should do them a solid by giving them their nominee. I mean, this is kind of how you'd think like politics works, generally speaking. And Hochul instead does the exact opposite, where these groups do, save her political skin, and then she turns around and picks the one person that they want less than anyone. And then is willing just to fight them to the absolute death over it. And, again, it's like, I don't know. I don't have an explanation for that.
Well, then what's your explanation for Hakeem Jeffries coming to the rescue on this front? Because we know he hates the left, right? That's why he's in the position he is. That's why he's probably going to be the speaker or the Democratic leader in the House for the next few decades. And he has the capacity to fundraise a lot. That's a prerequisite for that kind of position. So he recently started a PAC with Josh Gottheimer and others in order to ensure that leftists in primaries would not win. So that's his ideology. And she, as I mentioned earlier, despite the fact that the New York State Supreme Court, you can draw a direct line to electoral losses for Democrats in the House on the federal level. He has come to the rescue and has decided to throw his weight behind LaSalle and Hochul's effort here. What's your read on the calculus behind that? Is it just an anti-left thing, or is there something more broad that's happening here?
It's a really good question. It's one of these things, again, where it's like, if these people would just do what was best for themselves, it would make so much more sense and it would actually work better.
Right.
But again, what does Jeffries have to win from this? I can't see anything. I mean, already the math, you and I and everybody else could count with 14 state senators in the Democratic Party saying that they weren't going to support LaSalle. That meant that he had to get Republican votes to get confirmed. So already, the calculus is simple. For Jeffries to jump in on this this like charm offensive that Hochul went on last weekend, which was, she was up in the Bronx rallying on LaSalle's behalf, and Jeffries spoke as part of that. And then she went to Sunset Park in Brooklyn and was, invoking Martin Luther King to justify the nomination of LaSalle. And, it's just like the whole thing was so incredibly misguided. And why would Hakeem Jeffries jump in on that? Like, why was that something he felt like he couldn't miss? I wonder. I mean, I think that, this is something like old habits die hard, where, in the old New York Democratic Party, this would make sense. This is something that he would love to participate in, in the past. And certainly when he was, more sort of intimately involved in New York machine politics.
Right.
But as the highest ranking Democrat in the House, especially, the Biden administration has really championed these sort of more left-wing, non-prosecutorial
that's the thing. Biden's breaking records in nominating judges, and we're talking about how Republicans want to steal elections and their threats to democracy, and the leader of the Democrats in the House is rallying for a conservative nominee for the New York Court of Appeals top position to switch a majority. Right now it's 3-3. This would make it 4-3 conservative. It is mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing.
It's totally crazy. And again, just on a very sort of like constituent services level, like the whole thing that the Democrats have been talking about since Hakeem took over was, this is unity. Like, we're all on the same page. Like, a woman's right to choose is not up for question.
That
like,
too.
We support labor like more than we ever have. These sorts of things were supposed to be like, these are unanimous. We've decided on these principles. They're non-fungible. This is the Democratic Party. And compared to the Republican Party, which is riven with, discontent and all these ideological factions, like, here we are. And we overperformed in November because of our commitment to these things. And then, 2 months later, like that, it's actually a huge problem for him too, because these major women's groups, like, these aren't small groups that were saying that we can't support LaSalle. These were major national groups. And so what are they thinking when they see him rally for LaSalle after they specifically said, not this candidate, please pick another candidate? It actually is really threatening for the whole Democratic caucus at a higher level than just New York. And that's another thing where, this sort of statewide ineptitude that we've seen from the party is not just a statewide issue. It's absolutely a national issue. And beyond even just the fact that, Jeffries might be Speaker Jeffries if the New York Democratic Party got its act together, not just leader Jeffries. But again, I don't know. There are certain ways of being that are hard to, or certain patterns that are hard to break. I think that was an example of that where, I think Hochul called in favor. He probably thought that this was the sort of thing that he's done a million times and it shouldn't be that big of a deal. And I don't know if he was counting the votes or what, but not a great look.
Definitely not. Well, Alex, I really appreciate your time coming on explaining this to us, even though there are a lot of questions, still more questions than answers. Although, oftentimes it's like you could just draw this back to incompetence. But in this case, I feel like there's a lot of unanswered stuff about corruption, stuff we don't know about, deals made behind the scenes that hopefully will come to light soon. Alex Sammon, politics writer at Slate, thanks so much for your time. And you can read, I tweeted it out, but he has a great piece kind of detailing the whole saga that just came out yesterday, right?
Yeah, that's right.
At Slate. So check that out. Thanks so much, Alex.
Thanks so much.
All right, folks, with that, we are going to wrap up the first hour of this program and head into the fun half. Matt, what's happening on Left Reckoning?
Well, Sunday night, January 22nd at the, I keep wanting to say the Slipper Room, which is not the same thing, the Cutting Room. We're doing a live show, Give Them a Revolution give them an argument. This is Revolution, Left Reckoning, featuring special guests Sam Seder and Emma Vigeland and Bhaskar Sankara. Still tickets available. Get to that. And yeah, we did on Left Reckoning, I talked to Robert Skvarla about the church committee and why Jim Jordan is not going to run another one. So you can check that out.
I mean, we don't. They do not need to benefit from that framing whatsoever.
No,
so.
I mean, I think it's actually like kind of the problem is they don't have the literacy to really like latch on to it. Like no one on the Republican side like gives a fuck.
Right,
like,
right, exactly.
So like no one's talking about it anymore.
Hey, Brandon. I can hear you. We're setting up your shot.
Yeah, I don't know why. I got to refresh, Brandon.
1 second. I will say, though, in the meantime, today on ESPN, we will be talking about the upcoming divisional games, giving our picks against the spread. I had a terrible weekend. Every game, I think, went over against with the over-under. And Bradley's gained the lead, but I'm coming back, roaring back. And I do want to talk about the homophobic incident in the NHL. Provorov, what a pair of defensemen on the Philadelphia Flyers. Two huge bigots, and their decision not to wear the Pride jerseys for warm-ups, what that means, even though it's in their contract. More broadly, we'll be talking about that on youtube.com/ESPN show today at 4 p.m. Now we got Brandon and we got Binder. Boom. What's up, guys?
Nothing much. Feeling very centered now.
Oh, well, you are. The kudos to Matt on that.
Centering in process.
Yeah, he's centering you. He's like
the team keeps me grounded.
A yoga teacher. What's happening on the discourse, Brandon?
Actually, we have a new episode coming out Friday, and I mean that. I have to clarify when I mean that. I sat down with my co-host Richard to ghost dog it. That's when you podcast with only two people. And we discussed the new Velma show. We discussed the proliferation of AI projects that have sort of taken over the imagination of the internet, whether it be like chatbots or AI art, and the implications for the creation of art and commodification of just everything, basically. And then we talked a little bit more about, from a perspective of a power user of Twitter like myself and my co-host Richard, who's like more of a lurker, like what Elon Musk has meant to our own Twitter development. So good episode, especially if you're interested in bad cartoons or good cartoons. I don't really hate Velma, so it's spoiler.
Oh, you don't? I was curious about your thoughts on it because the discourse.
I heard like the way people talk about it, it's like as if the alt-right secretly got the IP to a beloved children's show and then made a secretly like anti-woke but ostensibly woke show. But is that not are people overreacting a little bit? Is that what you're saying, Brandon?
I think that's I can see where people get that interpretation from, but it's only because the show is very confused in its audience. Like it's one of the most inexplicable shows I've perhaps ever seen.
Pro cops, but they're a lesbian couple is what I've heard.
Is it pro cop? Because the cops are really bad in this. And so like that's what makes it confusing. Like everything is bad, but like not like, I mean, the show has some funny lines, but the most inexplicable part is how unfocused it is in its target audience. Like if it were just like, every joke was about like Me Too, I'd be like, okay, I get who's the target audience. Or if every joke was about, how Fred is an entitled like white boy in this, played by Dennis from Always Sunny, that'd be fine. But it's all of that. It's like all of that. And also it really can't be in like emphasize enough how little this has to do with Scooby-Doo. Not just the dog, but the actual like cartoon. And it seems more than anything to really be a waste. Like they greenlit this really violent, really like sexual thing and put Scooby-Doo's like brand on it, but it's in no way related to Scooby-Doo or good. It's just like a waste of the copyright, I feel like personally.
That's
but
what it seems like. It seems designed to piss everybody off. It's almost like a conspiracy because then you get people to talk about it given all the layers of like infuriation that it creates.
There's this criticism of Mindy Kaling stuff that's been going around that apparently a lot of the time she'll just write kind of like brown or Indian characters or Southeast Asian characters is like broadly just like, oh, like I hate myself and want to be white, and that's I've seen that a lot all over Twitter. I haven't watched the show, but that's the other big criticism I've been seeing about like, oh, Mindy Kaling's writing another character where she's like, I hate that I'm brown and kind of like have these characteristics and want to kind of like be homogenous white person.
Right.
I didn't really get that from the show because, like, again, so much is going on at any point. By the second episode, Velma's already slinging rock to pay off Daphne for, like, this is not really a spoiler because so much is going on. She's already like selling drugs for Daphne to pay her off to give her some like material to find her missing mom. None of this has to do with like real estate developers in costumes, and that stuff is never mentioned. They don't even like make jokes about it. It's all very inexplicable.
Was it written by AI that like?
It was written by Mindy
what's
Kaling.
that HBO show about the high school kids? Like, I feel like they fed.
Gossip Girl?
No, the more new one.
Euphoria.
Euphoria. Yeah, it sounds like they fed AI Euphoria and said make a Scooby Doo out of it.
Make it animated.
It's also. And as far as it's like Scooby-Doo, it's actually way more like the Breakfast Club and how it like organizes all of the Scooby Gang into like little discrete like social like positions that they have, like they're jockeying for stuff. But it has nothing to do with Scooby-Doo. I don't know about the Brown stuff, which sounds different, but really it just comes across as something written by like a AI chatbot that you fed Tina Fey stuff to. Like it's very like how 30 Rock kind of throws punches at everybody, but a lot of them land. Like, oh, it punches at liberal women who think that they're like super woke, but also they're slightly racist. It punches at like, NBC executives. Does that, but it's like really sloppy. So half the punches just don't connect and they end up punching themselves in the face. So it's just people being mad. It doesn't really make sense to me because there's so much Scooby-Doo content, but it's certainly like weird.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think we filled our Scooby-Doo and Velma quota.
Even if it was good, I wasn't going to watch
But
it.
I was curious, honestly. I mean, that saved me some time.
I'm gonna watch the whole thing though, just so you know. The whole season I'm gonna watch.
Good. I mean, I'm honestly, I wouldn't expect anything less. Not Brandon. Matt, what's happening on Doomed and Scam Economy?
Yeah, sure. So this week on Doomed, we took a look at Velma, and
what were your thoughts, Matt, on Velma?
Yeah, I've never been. I know it apparently has nothing to do with Scooby-Doo, but I've never been a Scooby-Doo fan. I think Hanna-Barbera cartoons are the second-rate cartoon company. Warner Brothers, Disney, all those companies, American cartoon companies did it better than Hanna-Barbera. So I'm throwing down the gauntlet, I guess, on Scooby-Doo and the Flintstones.
Sorry.
Hey,
Jetsons Meet the Flintstones is maybe the greatest piece of entertainment
you've
of
gone
all
too
time.
far.
And also especially the Flintstones Christmas. I mean, pretty much unsurpassed as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, continue, Binder.
I mean, literally any Bugs Bunny, Elmer Fudd meetup will definitely blow.
This is ridiculous. This is getting ridiculous. I thought that my Velma hot takes were.
And if you're talking about crossovers, I mean, just put on Roger Rabbit and you get Bugs Bunny and Mickey Mouse together, Daffy Duck and Donald. I mean, it doesn't get any better.
All right, are you 74 years old, or I mean, just trying to gauge this shit here? What
they put Scooby-Doo in Supernatural. That was the best. That was the best crossover I've ever seen.
Okay, we are.
Anyway, actually, I can be quick because there was no Doomed episode this week because I was sick last week and then all that stuff going on. So I needed to catch up on Scam Economy. So I did Scam Economy when I usually do Doomed this week. YouTube.com/Matt Binder, ScamEconomy.com. Spoke with Molly White. Take a look back at the past year in crypto to make sure we hit some of the stories that got looked over that were still weird and crazy and off the wall that we wanted to touch and hit upon. So definitely check that episode out. And then Scam Economy and Doom will be back on the normal scheduling this upcoming week.
All right, wonderful. 646-257-3920. We'll probably do 2 or 3 calls. Not that many. Sorry, guys. We went a little over. See you in the fun half.
You are in for it. All right, folks. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Anarchy.
Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just wanna degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back. Snowflake says what? The alpha males are back.
You are a madman!
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Cedar! What a fucking nightmare!
Bring back the DJ.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. You see white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting. And the alpha males, psych, fuck them. Snowflake says what? Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are black. And the Africans are back.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keep it at 100. Can't knock the hustle.
Come on, fuck them.
Things I do for the bigger game plan.
By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy.
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are black. Africans are back. Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
We are back. We have opened up the phone lines. We're here to have a good time. Get into some of these clips.
We want to hear what you all have to say about Velma. Please call in.
This is a Velma only funhouse.
V-Day.
I'm gonna read some IMs for a little bit. Kentucky Bloomer Hillary didn't understand the assignment of gamifying her campaign when she said Pokemon go to the polls. Yes. Custodial artist Emma, could you ask what the corporations are going to do when people learn to exploit or cheat the game? I'm sorry, I didn't see this until later. Dragonfly.
Fire them when they find them. They use it as an excuse to trim fat.
They use a cheat code, right? That will be the excuse.
But I mean that is what all that stuff incentivizes, is cutting corners and figuring out a way to hit the metric in the way most sort of advantageous to you as possible.
Right. Dragonfly, regarding Social Security, raise the minimum wage to $15 or higher. That would double the contributions of a ton of people and give them bigger payout at retirement. That's another solution, yes, but I think the primary one should be that the earners above 160K need to be contributing to Social Security, and it's a problem that that's not the case. But yes, wages need to be increased, and that would help with Social Security solvency. Spacco, Emma Collier Gwynn, the gallery owner who hosed down a homeless woman, was arrested Wednesday. Gwynn will be charged with misdemeanor battery for the alleged intentional and unlawful spraying of water on and around a woman experiencing homelessness on January 9th, 2022. That's a quote from the I guess from the arrest. So good.
Not a surprise, but hopefully that lesson gets learned to anybody else who might want to brazenly assault a homeless person.
Yep. Throw the book at him. Demian, speaking of corny shows, I just started watching Grimm, and I was surprised to see more than a handful of criticisms of capitalism and celebrations of democracy and class consciousness built into that show. I know it's a cop show with early Doctor Who levels of effects about big bad wolves and whatnot, but it's much better than I remembered. There you go.
What is this?
I remember watching a little. It's called Grimm. It was popular, maybe 2013.
Like the Brothers Grimm.
came around the same time when like everything was doing gritty, like fantasy reboots. Like that other show, Once Upon a Time, came out around the same time.
Yes.
To me, it looks like Supernatural, but
Right.
like with fantasy stuff.
It was, but it was on a major network, so
It's not as good as Supernatural is.
Supernatural's so funny.
It is. That was the era of Kristen Stewart as Snow White. That was like that movie era, right?
Yeah, when she played Snow White and Chris Hemsworth played like the Huntsman.
I kind of like that movie.
Yeah, Snow White and the
It was
Huntsman,
not well reviewed, but I kind of like that movie.
They
but
removed
I'm
Kristen
also
Stewart from the
a simp for
sequel.
her, so what?
They removed her from the sequel, and then they just like replaced her with, I want to say, Charlize Theron
Yeah.
as like Elsa, and then
Because
it's just
she had
called,
an
like,
affair with the director when she was like 21 years old, and he was in his 40s, and we were supposed to pretend that was totally kosher and also completely her fault. But
is the director of? I didn't realize the director of Twilight was also the director of that movie.
No, she was a woman. The first director of Twilight. They did end up replacing her with. I had a real Twilight face. They did end up replacing her with men for the rest of the movies, and the first movie is the only good Twilight movie.
Only one I've seen in theaters.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Good is also pushing it for the first one too, but it was, I guess,
it's pushing
the more
it,
acceptable.
but it's
the
the
more
only acceptable one. Yes, exactly. When they weren't caked in like so much makeup. Anyway, you guys want to do a clip or something?
Yeah,
sure.
Let's play a trailer from.
Actually, I got a trailer. I got a proposal. Brandon, you mentioned AI in the plugs, and there's something, a bit of output from AI that I thought we would talk about. This is from a guy at TATO_tweets, abstract organization, this guy, and he asked ChatGPT for the 10, he says, the intellectual dark web, top 10 pathologies and consequences according to ChatGPT, a thread. And let's just read through some of these. Number 1, the IDW's promotion of biological determinism and denial of science, the social construct of race, which is fundamental component of scientific racism. I would say a hit right there. I mean, everybody who remembers Sam Harris talking to Ezra Klein about the bell curve and how we weren't taking Charles Murray as seriously as we should be would know that is accurate. Scroll down to the second one. The IDW's promotion of transphobia and discrimination against transgender individuals, which is a violation of human rights. Yeah, I mean, I wonder who is the most pro-trans version of IDW. I couldn't name them. The IDW's promotion of neoliberal economics, which has been proven to exacerbate income inequality and undermine social welfare programs. Now, I think that one's less clear because I think they like sometimes make a point of being economically populist in like sort of rhetoric, but ultimately, like, yes.
Yeah, I mean, and they'll throw out UBI sometimes,
or I support Medicare for all. Like,
right, but at
ago.
least in theory, at least with UBI, I feel like you have to dig a little deeper with that kind of stuff because oftentimes it's promoted as a supplement, or not as a supplement, but as a replacement.
Yep.
Yeah.
The IDW's promotion of climate change denial, which is in direct opposition to the overwhelming scientific consensus. That's absolutely true. But Jordan Peterson is really on that beat lately. The IDW's promotion of anti-vaxxer conspiracy theories, which puts public health at risk. Again, another right on the money there. Brett Weinstein, particularly. Also, I think Peterson's dived into that. Although, like Sam Harris has broke with that, and also Eric Weinstein says he trusts vaccines because Israel wouldn't.
Right, but those guys are way less visible, and and Sam left Twitter for that reason.
Yeah, and they're not
he
can't
make money off it anymore.
They're not they're not grinding that axe nearly as much as the anti-vaxxers are. But I do think it's just worth underlining that Brett Weinstein's brother trusts vaccines because Israel does. The IDW's promotion of free speech absolutism, which often serves as a cover for hate speech and incitement of violence. That's, I think, true. The IDW's promotion of anti-feminist and patriarchal ideologies, which seek to undermine gender equality, which I would say any female member of the IDW is often saying what the boys want to hear.
Oh, yeah.
Interesting how that works out.
Thinking about Barry.
The IDW's promotion of Islamophobia, which is a form of racism and discrimination. I think that's just right on the money again. The IDW's promotion of Jordan Peterson went to visit Viktor Orban and talk about how Muslims weren't compatible with democracy.
Sam Harris,
Yes.
that is foundational to his career. That is how the IDW, or at least his shading of it, was born.
The IDW's promotion of anti-LGBTQ plus sentiment, which is a violation of human rights. Again, like particularly the T, they might be. It's like Dave Rubin style, like the gay people are okay. It's just like this crazy trans stuff. The IDW's promotion of authoritarian politics, again, like the Orban stuff. Eric Weinstein pretended like he was outraged by Peterson going to visit Orban, but there was no follow-up on that. It was all PR. And that's it. 10.
That was like the top 10.
That was the top 10. There's much more to say on this. Leftists argued in no uncertain terms all of these things right from the beginning, but to little avail. What is remarkable about ChatGPT's ability to automate organizing the arguments in an objective, non-accusatory way. So I'm curious what you guys thought about that, because I'm ambivalent about AI technology. I think that I think there are certain applications for it, and it's interesting. I think the main problem with it is like it's owned by Silicon Valley people and not by like the workers who are adding to the databases that it's drawing from to make its conclusion. But I'm just curious what you guys thought about that, and if you want to talk about AI in general.
Well, it's spot on. I just think, a lot of this was already covered in Michael Brooks's Against the Web, right? So you could if you want to see that or read that, you can get a lot of those things.
I mean, I wonder how much of that was taken from Michael Brooks.
What's the source material?
Yeah.
But this is my main problem with AI is it needs to be forced to tell folks what data sets it's using to. It needs to cite its sources, and it can do that. There's no way, and the reason it wouldn't, the only reason that ChatGPT or these other AIs wouldn't do that is because they want it to seem more magic.
That too, and I mean, they also it needs to be open source, right? That's the right wording for it. With citations,
and of course it can't be open source or even better like free software because they're going to try to monetize this and sell this to applications. But the main thing is like you need to just say like, okay, yes, and if you want to follow up, and this is the same with the art stuff. Like if you say I want a sort of like anime style David Brent from The Office, it needs to say what works of art that it used to inform itself what anime style was, what David Brent was, and then tell you that. And the fact that and I think that's like, as far as I get in, like that'd be the first statutorial regulation I would put on this is like you have to show that stuff.
Yeah, because I mean, with all of the concern that we see with NFTs about like, hey, you can own this digital asset, and this is going to be a way to support artists and creators. The reality is that if we don't have protection, some of these AI generators are going to be able to source from authors or artists, and there doesn't seem to be any guardrails for that usage, right? Or even citation.
Right. Well, another problem is that it's not meant to be necessarily factually correct. I mean, these AI, apps and software and programs and platforms that I've seen, like the ones that do try to like make like they like advertise, and with this one comes with fact checking. It's like a feature because it's not something that is necessarily cared about. The point is that it just is able to output something that looks like a human could have done it.
It's a fancy search engine.
Right, right. It's not important necessarily to the AI unless it's taught that it's important to be factually correct. It just needs to write something that looks convincingly human.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that a lot of this too is just people not fully understanding what AI and like everything that AI encompasses. Like Google already uses AI to help you find your searches. That stuff is already in existence in a lot of our search engines. We know when you do predictive text in your like emails or other things, like that's a type of AI, maybe not as advanced as what ChatGPT is. And we already know how a lot of this stuff works. It's references, it's copies, and we also know how it's monetized by people like Google, which, Google used to be a very useful tool. And now that you use Google, the first 18 results are literally just paid results. And then you get some like Pinterest stuff, you get some social media stuff organized to you, and then maybe at the bottom of the first page you'll get like one or two like of the most popular responses now, because it's been totally monetized and made as a way to sell ads to you under the illusion of like objective information. And that's like really the concern I have with and that's why I have always concerns with AI technology, is that like once it's monetized, that just means it's going to be automatically excluding things based on monetization, emphasizing things based on monetization, and people are still going to think of it as it's just a thinking machine that's making objective choices. Same like we see with the AI, racial bias in AI programs for police. It's impossible to program something outside of the context of the society it exists within if you're not being, very critical of that society. So a lot of this stuff, I don't have a problem with AI or AI art or any of the the products of those things. It's the context under which they create them under. I think that most people are understanding is like inherently an issue. I imagine that this chat GPT will just be incorporated into a bunch of search engines, a bunch of like AI chatbots for various levels of, and of course coding is probably pretty good at coding, I think too, so it might end up replacing one or two coders here or there, might be further incorporated into Google, but I don't think it's going to be the magical tool that people want it to be, the sort of source of all information. And in fact, it's like you said, information you're going to have to look up anyway. Like, I think that's what people don't really want to do. Like, they don't really want to follow those sources because we don't like teach them to do that outside of school. And so it just becomes like, I would love a search engine, I could type any question and it gives me like an essay back as opposed to me having to go through all the results. It's just making it easier and easier to misinform yourselves in certain ways.
Yeah, and I'd say like I think it is like going to be fairly significant, but I also don't think it's going to make society unrecognizable. Like from when I was like 10 to now, we have access to like basically every book so millions of books right in our pocket, right? And that's pretty revolutionary. And the thing with the chat GPT that people are freaking out about is like college papers, right? And like from my perspective, I feel like if it starts doing like essays that are like sort of like intro, body, conclusion, first of all, that stuff is kind of mechanical. So then it becomes sort of like a relationship a student has with a graphing calculator versus like an abacus. Like if you can do this basic like I actually don't care if you let an AI sort of help you write a paper, as long as you acknowledge that, and two, are able to edit it into something that actually like a human being can get something useful out of.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like I literally just had this conversation. I'm not that concerned about like kids have cheated since the dawn of time, and maybe this will be an easier tool for cheating and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But there's systems in place now where if you're taking a test remotely, you have a program open on your computer and you can only use that program and it shuts everything else down. They're just going to do that and try to incorporate things that detect artificial intelligence, I think. But
I also don't care if kids cheat in school. That's such a weird reason not to develop a tech, because ultimately, at the end, I think that what you're saying is true. Like if Chat GPT, is used properly, it should be used to like help you edit, to help you craft ideas, to be a more like organic way to read for people who have a hard time with sort of more rote types of like information. But ultimately, like technology should make your work more efficient.
Yeah.
If the entire process is just like rote and mechanical and can be entirely done by AI, then like what is the ultimate purpose of this essay? If that's the only source of learning people are going to get in this class, then that maybe you need to redo your own, and I know it's difficult, and sometimes you're not allowed to, but like that just speaks to like the like low quality of the education. Like if having like an AI, if having an AI do the essay and you can't recognize that it's not written by the person in class that you've been talking to, if you've been talking to them, I would imagine this would only be useful for like really, really big intro level courses that people take for gen eds. And past that point, you would notice that this doesn't sound like Keith. Yeah. This isn't Keith's voice. And so, so a few kids get an A in like intro to sociology.
Yeah, I hear that. Let's do a Candace Owens clip maybe, or this Tucker Carlson thing might be good actually as well. Which one, Matt? What are you thinking?
Let's start with the MLK clip.
Okay, sure. So Tucker Carlson had Seneca Scott on his program, cousin of Coretta Scott King. This was on Martin Luther King Day or the day after on Martin Luther King Day, and I just think that it's interesting that Tucker Carlson wanted to platform what is said here. And frankly, I see this as yet another ahistorical effort by nefarious actors like Tucker Carlson trying to use existing and righteous skepticism of the government for things that they may or may not have done as a way to build one's narrative and twist history in favor of far-right ideology.
And the context is apparently this new statue was erected in Boston that Tucker refers to as looking pornographic.
Right,
it's a set of hands.
Yeah, it's a weird statue. I don't particularly care about that part, but I do care about what is said here.
It has outraged members of Coretta Scott King's family. Understandably, if you've seen the statue, it's pornographic. Seneca Scott is a cousin of Coretta Scott King. He's called this monument a, quote, masturbatory metal homage in a new piece in Compact magazine. Seneca Scott's a union leader and community organizer, founder of Neighbors Together Oakland, and joins us tonight. Mr. Scott, thank you so much for coming on. So what do you tell us about this? I think a lot of people are kind of confused by it. It seems ugly at best, pornographic at worst. What do you think this is about?
You know, I think this is the product of the woke algorithm that has gone awry. It's like the child who, and the emperor who has no clothes, who had to have the nerve to shout out that the emperor was naked before his court were willing to follow in suit. And I think that's what's happened now that, you know, things have gone viral, and it's pretty much the consensus that this statue is a monstrosity and an insult to the family. I would like to say that, first off, it's important to acknowledge that it is Martin Luther King Day, and nothing should detract from his radical vision, Tucker. And he was assassinated by the U.S. government. You've talked about JFK's assassination recently. This was in the same period. And he was assassinated right when he was escalating from talking about racial bigotry to class and in the war in Vietnam.
I noticed.
And my cousin picked up that mantle and proudly, and I'm a very proud member of the Scott family. So I was rather upset to see that statue, to be honest with you.
Well, you make a good point that no one ever says out loud, but he had shifted to populist economics. I have no idea who killed Martin Luther King, but it's very obvious it was not James Earl Ray acting alone. He had 2 foreign passports. He was escaped from prison. The whole thing is ridiculous. Why is there no interest in that question?
Well, I think that it's a big moment, and there's a lot of pressure when you spend $10 million on something, and people are expected to.
Okay, all right, pause it for a sec. So
this is the biggest.
The consistent shoehorning of the statue back into the conversation is awkward at best, but I want to just remove the statue from the equation. I could not give less of a shit. The interesting thing there to me is, one, I had not remembered, Matt, that JFK's assassination has been covered on Tucker Carlson's program.
I mean, the recent shit he's nodded toward it.
Yes. Okay. But
sorry, just on that note, like Tucker Carlson, we talked about this with Robert Skvarla, started his career. Again, Tucker Carlson, whose dad was the Voice of America. Tucker Carlson himself wanted to be in the CIA and took weird vacations to Nicaragua early in his life. Started his media career saying Gary Webb is lying about all that stuff about CIA implications and drug running. So Tucker is what this is. This is a controlled hangout.
Yes.
What's going on here with regards to the assassination stuff.
That's why I think it's just so key to call it out, because one, he then also says that Martin Luther King was switching to, quote, populist economics. What's he trying to do there, right? The right has claimed populism, and that's the branding that's been associated with the Bannonites like Bolsonaro or Trump or Orban, all of which Tucker Carlson has been openly supportive of. And so he's trying to use Martin Luther King's legacy to give credibility to the brand of conservative that he is hitching his wagon to. That's what he's doing there, while at the same time nodding to justified skepticism about the assassination of Martin Luther King. I mean, what Tucker Carlson said there about the passports and stuff is true. I just think it's really important that the left call it out aggressively, because ahistoricism is a hallmark of Republicans and what they try to do, because without it, they're unable to sell their vision to the public. And Tucker's more adept at that, honestly, than anybody.
Right.
And this is a particularly perverse example of it, because everything Tucker Carlson supports, the FBI and the CIA at the time, and law enforcement, which is implicated in Malcolm X's death, Fred Hampton, all of these civil rights leaders that they targeted, it's in lockstep with what Tucker Carlson believes in. And so, but he's trying to change. He's trying to manipulate that decades later.
Why were we in Vietnam that MLK turned against? Why were we there in the first place?
Yeah.
This was imperial anti-communism.
And what was the populist? What were the populist economics that MLK was supportive of? It was expansion. It was
wealth redistribution.
Wealth redistribution and universal health care programs.
Why was MLK in Memphis?
I have a dream that we will turn our focus to the real threat, which is China. Nobody's keeping an eye on China. Yeah, like that's what Tucker.
But also, why was MLK in Memphis when he was assassinated? Because he was speaking for labor power.
Yep.
He was speaking for in support of a sanitation worker strike in Memphis.
Yeah.
Like, this is another way to whitewash MLK's legacy by Tucker kind of alluding to this shit without actually saying any of it.
Yep. Exactly. I thought we'd run out of ways to whitewash his legacy, but
It was
here
just
we
the
go.
content of your character quote over and over, spam.
He was
but this
just
is
about
different.
love, right? Here's a quote in cursive that you can post on your Instagram story, Wine Mom. But guys, weigh in.
Don't speak to Kathy Hochul like that.
Hey, whoa.
Kathy Hochul, sorry, I had to take that cheap shot because she literally says she referenced the "I have a dream" speech saying, "I have a dream that like judges won't be judged by 2 to 5 cases."
Yes, that was when she was speaking at a majority black church and kicked out an activist with a police escort, quoting MLK and equating him with her judicial pick.
I have a dream.
Judge you by what you said.
That we judge people on the content of what they can provide for me electorally, not on their judicial record.
I think it just shows not how little, but like how divorced from history our population is. We just have such a bad grasp of even like the recent history in America because of the way it's taught. And with the Stop Woke acts going around the country, it's going to be even easier to whitewash MLK's legacy. They'll have him pushing Donald Trump 2024 soon. Like MLK would have been a Trump voter, and I think
MAGA
that
MLK. What does the M stand for, baby?
I think, it's easy to just be like, it's pandering, and it definitely is pandering. Tucker Carlson knows his audience. He knows what they want to hear and what they will believe. But I honestly think it really shows how low of an opinion that a lot of right-wingers, a lot of politicians have about the American populace to be like, oh, yeah, no, you can just say anything about MLK. Like, one of the only historical figures Americans know anything about. Like, you can say anything about him. People are like, oh, yeah, he loved that. He loved Pepsi Cola and fried chicken. That was his favorite, that's why he's in that KFC ad or something. It's just, it's not a, we're not a very learned people. And so it's very easy to like make things up about historical figures that sound good.
Yeah. MLK didn't see color except for MAGA red. That's the only color he cared about.
All right. Yeah, I mean the smile, the giddiness on Tucker Carlson's face when he was able to turn this into like, oh yeah, MLK was really all about economic populism at the end. But to Tucker Carlson, that means something like, people like the Jimmy Dores of the world teaming up with the Boogaloo Boys to attack any sort of vaccination requirements at the workplace or any sort of safety measures like that. That's what economic populism is to them. Those sorts of things. And I had to look up the Kathy Hochul quote because it is actually even more amazing than I think you remember, Matt. I got to read it. It's very short.
Please read it.
Hochul says, when he was talking about MLK, when he was gunned down, assassinated, my family sat there and held hands and wept. How could this be? How could this man of God who taught us about nonviolence and social justice and change and not judging people by the color of their skin or 1 or 2 cases out of 5,000 cases decided.
You mean their actions? Their actions.
So brazen. It's like it's a throwaway line when you're talking about Martin Luther King.
I didn't realize that being
it's not even like, oh, in his dream speech, it was in the context of us experiencing his assassination.
Yeah. Apparently what you do in your elected office or in your judgeship is an immutable characteristic akin to your skin color.
I mean, so people react to that in different ways. Hochul's talking about, if you look at like RFK's reaction to MLK and like the speech he gives, it's like one of the most amazing sort of impromptu rhetorical performances in American political history. And some people are like, well, maybe I can use this to ram a judge through.
Yeah,
60
right.
years.
It's just amazing what people can project onto like Martin Luther King Jr. considering how like specific his message was. It just becomes a vehicle for like, liberal pathology of like, well, you don't want to judge anybody too harshly, even on their actions, because MLK is famously never told you to judge anyone based on their actions. He never wrote letters about white moderates or their inactions or actions and how they fall into the like sort of the culture of hate that we have. He only once said a single line about people not being judged by the color of their skin. That's it.
Did you guys see Elvis, the movie, the recent Elvis movie?
I did not.
Did you see it, Bender?
I did.
Okay, so this just reminded me because RFK's speech about MLK is featured in the movie, and this speaks to, like, again, like just the broad revisionism behind all of this stuff when it comes to MLK, that it's just so easy that he's essentially an avatar for anything you want to graph onto him now. Throughout the movie, all of these like specific historical deaths occur, and like, you see Elvis's reaction to them when he's watching on TV. And the only thing that Austin Butler's Elvis says when he looks at the TV when MLK, it's announced that MLK is assassinated, and he's watching RFK's speech, he goes, "That guy always told the truth."
Oh, kill me. I'm so glad I didn't see that movie. And I will say, I mean, there's a reason that Ronald Reagan is the president that presided over making MLK Day a federal holiday. They knew what they were doing when they were whitewashing his
I'm not sure about this Seneca Scott person, but he might be very prominent. I just think it's very interesting that the only person even semi-related to like MLK they could get on the show was like MLK's wife, like second cousin, and he's just like, my family, like referring directly to Martin Luther King Jr. I'm like, I don't know about that one, fam. Like, I don't like he didn't even seem old enough to have been alive when Martin Luther King Jr. was like assassinated.
I don't.
What happened to Alveda King? That was their go-to for so long. Was she busy? Was she busy on Martin Luther King? That's what I was
thinking. Maybe it's gotten even too unsavory for her. I don't know.
I mean, I don't necessarily see the problem with the statue. I don't think it looks like a giant penis. It just looks like two hands clasping on, like, I don't know, a metallic, like part of like a chain link. But ultimately,
I just say it's a reference to like a picture, and they don't show the angle that the picture is actually taken from, so it does look odd. I mean, it's a weird statue kind of from most angles. But I mean, I don't care, and that's that. There's the statue. Enjoy it. Whatever. Sure.
All right, let's take a quick call.
It'd be nice instead of statues is if we actually like implemented some of the war on poverty.
We can't do that.
Yeah.
I mean, this is donated by artists or by donors to make art, lasting art.
We should take their money and give it to people.
What if instead of honoring MLK's memory by building statues of him, we honored his memory by implementing the policies in prescriptions for society that he, had.
I mean, don't be practical.
I was going to say minting NFTs, but that works too.
Is there already not an MLK like
NFTs?
Is there not like a bored ape that's like MLK? Like, I feel like there's like one for every famous person you might have heard of.
I mean, David Guetta might own that one, but
that's the one that
OpenSea does list a Martin Luther King Jr. video NFT, animated famous people. So hey, if you want to get in the NFT, the MLK letter NFT project, all sorts of NFT opportunities out there for our civil rights loving people.
Calling I think if from a 718 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, is this me?
That's you.
Hi, I'm Alex from New York.
Hi, Alex from New York. What's on your mind?
Yeah, long-time listener, first-time call. I've been trying to call you guys for a while. So I just wanted to talk about the Hochul thing. I think, sorry, I'm a little nervous.
No, you're okay. You're doing great.
Yeah, that, you guys, Matt and Bradley and you, Emma, brought it up at the beginning of the show about how Hochul is like, a bad version of Cuomo. I think we can agree about that.
Mm-hmm.
And how
an incompetent one, at least.
Oh yeah, of course. And so I think because I was on the Kristen Gonzalez campaign over the summer, and my point is I think we need to remind people in New York that she is essentially Andrew Cuomo. and maybe we can just start calling her sarcastically Governor Cuomo.
Sure.
You know, as a personal insult.
I mean, I think
I
think it's useful to keep pointing out that Cuomo handpicked her as his number 2, and that's why she is where she is. And her political career up until that point is not at all remarkable or interesting. And like, I just can't get over who this person thinks she is. Like given that, like, you barely squeaked over the line in the first election, you actually had to run for the office, and now you're trying to do this. Like, it's crazy to
and
me.
sunk the rest of your party's nominees essentially
Exactly.
elsewhere in the city and state.
It's nuts. Good job working on Kristen's campaign, Alex. Good job getting involved, and hey, she's in there, so that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just say one last thing about Hochul? Yeah, and I think what we have to do is, and the reason why I brought Kristen up is I think her and like AOC and what was his name from Florida?
Frost, Maxwell Frost.
Maxwell Frost. I think the millennials and Zoomers have to start primarying these boomers and silent generation Democrats to stop the Hochuls and the Eric Adams and the Hakeem Jeffries, who are like essentially just the Generation X, like carbon copies of these old timers. You know, I think that's what we have to do, because you know I think New York is a microcosm, as we just saw with our mayor and governor. That's what's going to happen, and I wonder what's going to happen when Hakeem Jeffries is majority leader of the House.
Yeah, it's
Speaker.
concerning.
You know, it'll be the same thing.
I appreciate the insight. Thanks so much, Alex.
Thank you for your time.
All right. What should we do here? What do you recommend? I mean, we have Dave Rubin. We also have Candace Owens.
Double threat.
Crowder thing. Are we gonna save that for Sam?
Yeah, we can save it.
Let's do the Candace Owens. All right, let's do Candace Owens. I find Candace Owens darkly fascinating, partly because every one of her segments seems to be such an exercise in projection that I'm almost shocked. I'm not shocked, given who she is, but I'm almost shocked that she doesn't have any amount of self-awareness to realize that. She just went on this bizarre rant against therapy and how people don't need it and how you shouldn't need it. And I'm just going to let her take the lead here.
Do not consider yourselves wrong for going to therapy. I once went to therapy. I had to try it out because my parents were getting divorced and I was dragged into it. I hated it. It wasn't for me. But it is for some people, and I do suppose that some people are coming out and being better people. But on the whole, as we move toward this society that believes that feelings trump facts, the facts don't matter, that the feelings are so important that we have to ignore the facts, we have to assume that the majority of the therapy sessions that are happening are reflecting that, right? That you have people sitting in a chair telling people that their feelings are all that matter, that no matter what they do in this world, it's perfectly okay because of some tragedy or upset that they suffer when they were 5 years old. And what has it produced? Well, it's produced a society of men like Prince Harry and women like Adele who overshare, who tell us way too much. And it's not a society that I want to live in. I want to live in a society like the one that my grandfather lived in. And I tell people this all the time. I never saw my grandfather cry a day in his life, even when I knew he was positively destroyed and heartbroken when we lost my grandmother, surprisingly, right? A woman that he was married to from a time that he was 17.
What an ideal.
The woman that he dedicated his entire life to and built his entire life around. My grandfather did not cry at her funeral. He was one of those men that believed that no matter what you were going through, you let it burn in your chest, right? And a lot of men don't like that.
That is not good for you, man.
Wait, okay, just pause it.
Just dumb as hell.
I just
Jesus.
We're idealizing the fact that her grandfather was not in touch with his emotions enough that he wasn't able to, and maybe he cried in private. But she's like, it would have made me uncomfortable to see him cry. So I'm so thrilled that he did not.
And like she sees it as a positive that he didn't visibly show emotion, that his longtime wife is dead.
She is longing for a society filled with like sociopathy, but also truly repression. I mean, that is what she's longing for. I mean, that's what they advocate for with trans and gay people. I mean, you can be who you are, but I don't want to hear about it. They want trans kids to either kill themselves, basically, or go back in the closet so we don't have to hear about it. And that's the ideal that she's advocating for there. But damn, I mean, if this isn't a cry for help and therapy for her, I don't know what is.
Yeah, I mean, there's a critique of therapy generally that like decades and decades of professionalized therapy hasn't led to people being generally happier in a sense. And I think the underlying problem is actually like capitalism and things like that that need to be addressed. But I would also say, like, in a country that doesn't even offer people the chance to see if therapy might be good for them because of price discrimination, like this is basically just serving that status quo of like, you know what, like because I like, despite me saying that thing up front about like the decades long where we have therapy, like I still think there is probably something useful to having somebody you can go and work through things with people, and we just don't offer that to people. And instead, we have people like Candace saying, actually, you're better off without it anyway.
Choke down your feelings and do not question the system, which means don't question capitalism, as you say. Yeah.
The most interesting part about that to me, and I'm sorry for cackling when she said that her grandfather didn't cry at his wife's funeral, but it's just, you know, I love how especially her and Ben Shapiro start off a lot of these segments talking about like the liberal tendency to position facts over or feelings over facts, and then like really just go into like a entirely personalized feelings-based opinion about the way people should behave. And it seems like her main reason for not wanting other people to share their emotions is because it makes her uncomfortable, which is not like a fact-based.
Her grandfather, right? You know, why is she longing for the fact that he wouldn't cry? It's because seeing an authority figure in her life crying would have made her uncomfortable, which is the thinking of a 10-year-old.
And it's about, you know, something that she's taken with her into her whole life, and that's, you know, just positioned as an inherent quality of masculinity. But, you know, you hate to say it, but if she were comfortable in her own feelings and comfortable in her own self, it shouldn't matter if the person is crying over there. It shouldn't matter if someone is telling you their feelings. It seems as though, like, you know, Republicans and people like Candace Owens and Ben Shapiro understand that what they're doing is positioning their feelings as facts, and they don't want to get into like a back and forth with you about your feelings. They just want to, you know, focus on their own as like an objective, you know, fact as in feelings that are objective. Like, it's right to feel this way in this moment. That makes it a fact versus like, you know, not crying at your funeral, or rather crying at your wife's funeral, which is like just feeling, you know, they just think that a certain type of feeling.
It is literally a self-created safe space in which her feelings she can identify them as fact, which gives them more validity, as opposed to other people who might be questioning their own feelings with other fact sets, which is a challenging thing to do, but that is kind of the purpose of therapy. She could unpack that in therapy very easily, and she has the financial ability to do so. I'm hard pressed to think of another public figure that I think could benefit more from it. But
also, there are different types of therapy too. Like, you know, she seems like her understanding of therapy is entirely based on like popular culture, and that seems to be like the dominant strain of therapy people talk about on like Twitter, which is like the upper middle class, like white woman going into the therapist to tell her how hard her life is, and then like, you know, get a prescription for Xanax and sort of zone out. But that's not what all therapy is. Even, you know, some of it is cognitive behavioral therapy, some of it is psychoanalysis, some of it is just like, it's like, you know, drug therapy. This is just like a cartoonish, vulgar opinion about therapy because she doesn't want to see like men cry. Like, she doesn't want to see like a man cry because it would make her, you know, it would make her sexuality and sexual identity feel different. That's just like, which is like entirely feelings based.
100%. And I really do feel like at least in therapy for me, when I'm talking about my own feelings, there's a lot of times my feelings are literally challenged by fact sets, so I don't catastrophize or make things into stuff that's bigger than they are. But that regardless, let's just finish.
The more I hear about Candace Owens'
Yeah.
teenage years, the more I feel like she maybe should just try to find a therapist that works for her, as opposed to say like, "Oh, this isn't for me," because it seems like she has some stuff to work through.
Yeah,
really glosses
right.
over the whole. My parents got divorced. It was really upsetting. She was, yeah, stupid.
Yeah.
Thrust into it, dumb. Keep going.
Also,
Yeah.
I was a victim of a racist attack by like a politically connected kid.
Right.
What do you want her to cry about it?
Yeah. That would be feelings. Keep going.
My grandmother, surprisingly, right? A woman that he was married to from the time that he was 17. The woman that he dedicated his entire life to and built his entire life around. My grandfather did not cry at her funeral. He was one of those men that believes that no matter what you were going through, you let it burn in your chest, right? And a lot of men don't like that now. Men don't know. Men need to be vulnerable. You actually don't need to be vulnerable in public. You don't need to be vulnerable in public. We need to see examples of strength everywhere. Strong women and strong men. And of course, we all assume that you have moments of vulnerability. We all do. All I'm saying is that we don't want to hear about it. Stop. Button it up. Let it burn in your chest. And that's all I have to say about that.
Let your pain burn in your chest.
Who is expressing their feelings to Candace Owens? I cannot imagine trying to get sympathy
Certainly
from
not her
Candace Owens.
husband, because that
or her
would be
grandfather.
weakness. Or her grandfather, yeah. She's
Listen,
also
the only time I ever saw my husband cry is when Kanye West canceled that multi-million-dollar Parler deal.
Parler merger.
And listen, he was allowed to do that, okay?
Yeah, I just
Do
advocating.
you think she's speaking like to Kanye with this?
She's speaking to herself. She's also she's conflating repression with masculinity and strength, and also just like, frankly, when conservatives repress their feelings, they are much more willing to accept simple answers to things as opposed to more complex questions, and that I think benefits her and her Daily Wire colleagues.
Rather than like processing it healthily, let it like get your blood pressure up for like decades.
And then you can see outside forces, right? Maybe they're brown or from a different country, or they have a different gender ideology. They're the threats. There's nothing you need to look at internally for. It's all outside shadowy figures.
Or even, if it isn't outside, it's the obverse of that, which is that if you're having a problem, if you're feeling bad, that's just your own weakness. And so like, obviously a lot of therapy nowadays, insofar people can afford it, is probably talking about like structural issues, people feeling anxious about the climate, people feeling anxious about, inflation, I guess, or like just being generally unable to afford things, people feeling anxious because of LGBTQ issues and the various forms of hate crimes we have in our society. Yeah. And she just wants you to bury that all in. Don't express it out loud, because whether it's a feeling or not, like expressing that you feel anxiety about hate crimes in our society might lead to change in those fields. Like the right-wing goal has been, as long as I've been online, to frame anything that is expressed with any sort of emotion as though it's somehow invalid. Yeah. And then when they find out that the rest of the world that they navigate doesn't really treat it that way, they just like come online and whine about how like no one respects how they feel about feelings.
Yeah, this is like Andrew Tate, like sort of mindlessness.
Yes.
Like actually like it's your fault for not being tough enough. I mean, just ridiculous.
And if you make it about if you make it about your own, personal failings, people are not going to be less predisposed to think about the world more critically, and that their feelings are actually connected to larger society. It's just it's a way to atomize people.
Yeah.
Also, her longing.
Hey, you know
for
what?
the
I have
days-
an idea. The next time Candace Owens sees somebody that transitions their gender, maybe let that burn in her chest instead of getting onto some platform and bitching about it.
Yeah, we don't want to hear about it.
Yeah.
Stop.
Right.
Facts don't
I
care
gotta
about
say,
your feelings.
her longing for the days of when her grandpa was told that men should be men. I mean, I'm looking up a little bit of history, what I could find on him, and he did give a interview to the Daily Mail a couple of years ago when he was upset that his granddaughter laughed at the New Zealand mosque shooting in Christchurch, and in it
the one she inspired.
Yes, the one she inspired. And he says in this, I'm from the South and I was born and mostly raised in North Carolina. And I know how it was. My father was attacked by the Ku Klux Klan back in the day. And he put me under the bed because of all the bullets that were coming into the house. I mean, I'm going to assume that has something to do with the guy's emotional state later in life.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So maybe him not crying at his wife's funeral is not something to hold up on a pedestal, but actually something to feel really bad about. Honestly,
And
just
maybe-
interesting what
maybe
you
he
emphasize.
and maybe he wouldn't, as she claims, long for those days, right?
Yeah.
Speaking for him.
And also, some people just process emotions differently. It's like not all grief. She assumes that he, cried in public. Cried in private. Maybe was vulnerable in private. Some people don't cry when they're sad. Some people just throw up. Some people get like so sad or so anxious that they just they just expel things from their gastrointestinal tract. It's just like she wants everyone's emotions to conform to a very rigid standards that either index masculinity or strength or femininity. And people are just complex. That's why they go to therapy.
Mm-hmm. Rob from Dedham, don't forget Candace Owens was a liberal when she started her career. She represses everything, including her politics, for money. Yeah. Abu Mancho says, I am a bit older than Candace, and my grandfather may have been a bit older than hers, and from an even earlier time. I remember as a child seeing him cry at my aunt's funeral. It remains one of the most moving memories I have.
Yeah, I can think of at least one of my grandpas crying. And I didn't be like, oh, that's the soy grandpa.
Hey, stop.
Candace Owens is only 33. That seems impossible.
I know.
That seems like I just I remember her being on television since I was in college. How is that possible?
Yeah, she's...
No, I don't think she was. She started in 2015. She was still red pill black on the sort of alt-right YouTube sphere.
It feels like she's been with us for much longer.
It feels like she's been here forever.
Yeah, Bingo Dango says, holy shit, Candace is definitely in the top 5 most evil right-wing commentators.
That origin story is wild.
Of the mainstream ones, her and Tucker Carlson, I would put definitely towards the top.
Mm-hmm.
Salt Lake Lefty. So I missed most of the Velma segment. What was Brandon's opinion of it? Good or bad?
We're not going to
qualified approval.
Yeah, it's. I would say neither. Right.
I would, if you're going to rank it on a scale of United States of Owls, I would say it's not quite as good as United States of Owl, but I'm definitely looking forward to the 3rd episode.
Okay. No one can tether themselves to United States of Owl except for you.
That's a very that's a standard unit of measurement.
Yeah. Right.
Even the actors won't do it.
Daredevil, what does Candace Owens have to say about Jordan Peterson? Up yours, woke moralists. Good point.
Intellectuals are allowed to let a little emotion fly. It's because they're so intellectual.
Yes, right. He's flown.
LMFAO.
I think that she wouldn't be able to hide her disgust if he cried in front of her, though. I think she would just be shirk away.
Yeah, right. I really hope no one in her audience is struggling. That's.
They have to be, right? Because they're watching Candace Owens.
Yeah, I'm sure they're all doing great.
Yeah, all mentally healthy people.
I just feel bad for them.
I'm the first viewer of every Candace Owens video, and I'm doing fantastically.
Edit Tone 977. Are Candace Owens and Matt Walsh on PSYOP missions? Honestly. Real Ace Attorney, I'm offended that Matt Binder would even joke about minting an MLK NFT. On an unrelated note, I will be minting a new batch of Malcoin X tokens in the lead up to February in order to honor civil rights leaders for Black History Month.
That's a good one. If it were a year ago, you would already be a millionaire. You should have come up with that.
Should have gotten on that earlier. Terror on the Prairie. As I prepare for my trip to the Big Apple this weekend, I have certain expectations. According to Fox News, I've seen at my gym, the place is a crime-ridden hellscape where everyone is fighting for their very lives every day in the subways, and there is easy access to drugs. I've always enjoyed a good battle for my life against coyotes and big cats, and I'll need the opioids to help with the post-subway battle wounds against the greatest predators, man. My disappointment will be high if it ends up being just a normal city that predominantly, and then you got cut off. But that is true, and I had a family member who came into the city, more distant, who they went on the subway and was saying, well, it really is not that bad. It was much worse in the 80s.
It's not as bad as all the
70s.
Emergency trauma clips that you see on the news.
Exactly.
I don't know what you're talking about. The moment you book a ticket to New York City, you've been robbed already. If you check your wallet after that, you see that it's been lifted off of you.
There was I don't exactly remember where, but there was a really interesting study done that basically pointed towards the idea of a not a crime wave, but a like reporting on crime
Yes.
wave. That like the actual coverage
We
of
did that
news,
on the show,
of crime was so much more disproportionate than any actual. Like obviously there still is violent crime. There's violent crime everywhere, and it's increased in every area of the country, including rural areas. But like the actual like eyewitness news, like local news, like it's the assignment editing more than the actual crime itself.
It's red state urban areas like Omaha are like particularly rising, and like the fundamental truth that it bases itself on is we do have a country that basically grinds people down to desperation, to where we do have more of this sort of stuff than other countries. But yeah, it's purely I talk to people from North Dakota all the time, and they're like like my grandma's impressed that I've lived here for so long and haven't been like murdered, and it's like I'm happy none of you have died in car crashes to drunk driving or whatever, because frankly that's statistically more likely than me like dying in some sort of mugging.
I've been robbed more times outside of New York City than I've been robbed inside of New York City.
Yeah, that's actually true. I've never been. I was robbed. The only time I've been robbed was in the suburbs.
Mm-hmm. That's what it's known for.
Yeah. All right.
I've never been robbed because I guess I just spark fear into the hearts of anyone who thinks of doing anything to me.
You're too physically intimidated.
Calling
That's
from
the
a
truth.
308 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? I think I know who it is.
It is the Terror on the Prairie.
Hello, Kowalski.
I haven't watched that yet.
How are you?
I am not going to experience an escape from New York scenario visiting your fair city.
You are not. You are not. Although, I mean, maybe you could manufacture that. I'm sure. You could do an escape room. Would that feel better?
I think the public transportation in Escape from New York is probably better than it is in real New York in terms of scheduling.
I'm curious how many people in your audience actually get the reference of Escape to New York. I feel like that's kind of no reference.
Yeah, I mean, you're on the lower end of the age I would get that, Kowalski.
We're just so mature out here on the prairies.
I guess you are.
But I originally wasn't going to call in, but I actually, and this is unironically true, saw the first episode of Velma when I was in Florida this past weekend. And I have to say, I went with the Matt approach of watching the program, and I think it really helped. Gummy bears are awesome.
There you go.
So,
yeah, don't waste your edibles on Velma.
It was more than that. Don't you worry. I think we watched.
Okay.
I think you should leave for like.
Oh, there you go.
That's the perfect show for that. God, I love that.
Undoubtedly.
Show. Yeah.
But I am a little concerned with Bender's take on cartoons. My thumb is currently hovering over the unsubscribe on your Patreon. Unless you're willing to change your opinion.
Change your mind, Bender.
I will not be bought in that way. No, definitely not for Magilla Gorilla and Hong Kong Phooey and the rest of the Hanna-Barbera crew.
Wow. You are just out to lunch, Matt Bender.
Do I dare
I can respect his ability not to give in to threats.
I will never sell out Goofy. And I don't know.
The Animaniacs?
Animaniacs, yeah, I would never.
When I found out that Goofy was black coded, that a lot of things clicked in my head about a Goofy movie. You know, a lot of things clicked about a Goofy movie. I think I forget what the name of the girl he's like has a crush on that movie. That she's like Dominican or something. Like it's basically just like Love Don't Cost a Thing with Nick Cannon. It's very people online come up with a lot of good ideas.
There are a lot of cartoons now that you guys bring all this up. But, well, that was pretty much the only pointless thing I had to bring up. Also, lastly, with Candace Owens, I think her mindset really does explain why most mass shooters are, middle-aged men who have never really, had proper psychological, growth. Also, do you think she would find it, cool if her husband was like, when you die, I won't shed a tear?
Yeah, it's odd. And
nothing would make her happier.
She's like, oh, happy Valentine's Day.
I'm so hot for you right now.
I do think I would love to go back, actually, that sparks a good point, Kowalski, and see what she said about the Uvalde shooting and mental health. because at the same time she's advocating, for letting your feelings burn in your chest and not seeking health care. The right wing kind of pivot in order to get away from gun control was mental health.
Well, I mean, ideally, I guess the right wing position is that you should let it burn in your chest until you only shoot yourself. That's like their position on it. Like that's the only kind of gun violence that is okay. Although, I think it's worth mentioning, at least when it comes to like Candace Owens, that she's never been wrong about anything. So I think we're being too harsh on her.
You're right. All right, Kowalski, thanks so much.
You guys have a good one.
You too.
Bye.
All right, let's do one more clip. I realize we haven't done that much. Should we just, since we've been talking about the Hector LaSalle thing, should we just do that clip?
Do we got anything? I thought I saw something George Santos on there. Do we got something good from him?
Oh, we do. Well, let's do that. Hold on one sec. I just X'd out of my damn sheet by accident. Sam prints those out, but I sometimes lose them in my tabs. All right. So which number is this? 2. So the George Santos story just keeps getting crazier and crazier. It's hard to keep up, but the latest updates are, one, that his mother was not in the country on 9/11 when he claimed she died. That has been now verified via customs documentation.
Do we know that some like debris didn't get in the atmosphere and sort of like
blown to Brazil,
jet stream down to Brazil,
or that she died of a broken heart over 9/11? We can't. I don't know if we can verify that quite yet.
Do we know that she's even really dead?
She died in 2016, I believe. I mean, again, this is hard to keep track. We don't fully know that. But his roommate was interviewed speaking about her, and that's a whole different wormhole that we won't go down right now. 2, recently we have discovered that according to 2 people in Brazil and a photograph that seems to confirm it, George Santos dressed in drag and participated in drag shows in Brazil.
which is fine, by the way.
Which would be awesome if he wasn't such a psychopath and a part of a party that's advocating for taking LGBTQ rights away and saying that these people are groomers.
Yeah, this is Qatar Ravash, a.k.a. George Santos, a.k.a. Anthony DeVolder, a.k.a.
Allegedly.
Anthony Zabrowski, allegedly. And they're serving.
Yeah, I mean, this, honestly, truly, right? Go off, but actually go off into the good night and don't be in Congress anymore, is what I mean to say by that.
It is a shame, this find out someone used to be cool and then they just turned out to be no longer cool.
You're right. I wish that that was the only controversy, because then you see this, and this story he basically set up a GoFundMe, allegedly, for this disabled veteran to get his dog's tumor removed, raised the money on the GoFundMe, closed it, and the guy never saw the money.
I mean, Santos is a scammer. He's the type of guy that runs these things where it's trying to fish you into email or sends you fake messages, and he just accidentally used it to propel himself into public office.
Next, we'll find out he claimed he was a Nigerian prince. But here is that veteran who went on CNN to talk about what happened to him.
I was homeless at the time. I had broken an ankle really bad, couldn't work for a year and a half, so I couldn't pay my rent, and I was evicted. I was living in a tent on the side of Route 9.
Can I just say, sorry, but this country needs to take care of people better. I mean, not just veterans, but that is all too typical a story, and it's despicable that he was put in a position to be victimized by people like Santos.
I mean, the Republican Party victimizes
a sitting congressman.
The Republican Party and let's be real, the Democrats who allow it to happen victimize him systemically on a daily basis. But what does it say about this guy George Santos that he sought him out to do this to him, or at least that when the guy came to him asking for help, that he thought to do this? But keep going.
I was homeless at the time. I had broken an ankle really bad, couldn't work for a year and a half, so I couldn't pay my rent, and I was evicted. I was living in a tent on the side of Route 9 in Howell, New Jersey with my dog, and she had already had that growth growing. It was getting bigger and bigger by the minute, it seemed. I finally decided to take her to the vet to see what they could do to have it removed, and they gave me a $3,000 quote. I was homeless. I didn't have any means to pay for that at all. So one of the vet techs in the place said, "Hey, I know this guy. He runs a charity and he saves a lot of animals." And she was like, "You want me to hook you up with him?" So she took pictures of me and Sapphire. She sent them to Anthony DeVolder, and the GoFundMe started. It was up and running. I put it on my Facebook page. My friends and family donated to it. They shared it. I had a lot of my Navy buddies that I hadn't heard from in years actually gave me hundreds towards it. There were some other donors that I didn't ever recognize their names or anything. They might have been through his organization. They might have been friends of friends for all I know. So we raised $3,000 in 2 months, maybe 3 months. It was 6 years ago. And as soon as the money came through, I was like, great.
You could save your dog.
We can get it right in and get this done. Mr. DeVolder did not, or Santos, decided that he did not want me to use my local vet. He wanted me to use his vets in Long Island or Queens. I don't remember which borough or town it was in. And that was the only way he was going to let it happen. So we took the dog to the vet. And the vet said, "Well, we believe this is too vascular, it's inoperable, but we'd like to go and have her have an ultrasound so we can see if we can do anything with it." I don't drive. I was homeless, and I paid a ride. I paid a friend to bring me up there.
To his vet.
To his vet. I paid the tolls, the gas, lunches, and DeVolder was supposed to pay me back for that. I even was dumb enough to give him my bank account and my routing number because he said he was going to put the money right into my account. Never happened. That was when I started smelling something fishy.
And
it's just like, I mean, I don't know. There's a tendency, I think, for some that I don't love. Some people who in this country who have no sympathy for homeless people and yet only have sympathy for dogs or animals or things like that. But I mean, in this instance, like it's just a triple whammy of predation, and it's just incredibly cruel.
It sounds made up. Not that because it is, but because he defrauded a homeless veteran of money they were raising to take care of his sick dog. That's like real scumbag. That's like real scumbag level stuff. And I would just say I think that's just the kind of thing that people, when you talk about Republican politicians and the way, and also Democratic politicians and the way in which they enact these sorts of policies that oppress and marginalize and make desperate all sorts of people across our country, there is this impulse too to treat them like, well, on a personal level, they are good. They're like, they're family people, they have friends, they have people they care about, and so you can't judge them for basically putting a gun to the head of poor people they don't know. But I think too often we find that a lot of the people who belong to these parties, whether they be Democrat or Republican, in positions that you would hope people would have empathy, are actually not just in their political life, these kinds of scumbags, but also in their personal life. Obviously, most people aren't to the level of this, but it does go to, show that like a lot of the assumptions we make about the people in power and the kind of qualities that they have to get elected there, although that's being disabused of a lot of people now, is, it's wishful thinking. Like, there's no reason to believe that someone who's shitty politically would be a good person on a personal level.
Yeah.
What's really messed up about this, there's another part of this clip. Like, I think sometimes people have this feeling when they see a homeless person with a dog, where they're like, "Oh, I feel bad for that." Like you said, I feel bad for the dog because they're like, they don't have a choice. They're not in a home or something like that. This guy details how basically this dog was the only like kind of other outlet for any sort of emotional response or that he had in his life, and that she prevented him from killing himself multiple times because he knew that she would not have care without him. And so like it just kind of lays bare that like this is a really, really sick person.
Oh yeah, he's a sociopath. No question.
That has really
no question.
It seems cartoonish if it wasn't so transparently evil and it wasn't so transparently dastardly that like I think some people could potentially think a very uncharitable person could be like, oh, like when you think that you're being scammed, like it's not. I don't think it is any way fair to think like this guy had a right to trust somebody trying to help his sick dog.
This is typical. Santos is typical. This country cultivates the desperation that makes this country a target rich environment for scammers, and it's done it for a century plus.
Also, I would say, what makes it cartoonish is that it's also not that much money. Obviously, for a homeless veteran, $3,000 is a lot of money. But, when you talk about crypto scams and some of the larger GoFundMes that have had defraud happening to them, like that one woman who raised that money for like that homeless guy and tried to keep it or something a few years ago, those like go into like the hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars of money. This is like $3,000 to like, that means that means so much more to the man you're stealing it from than directly from it, because you've spoken to him. It's not like through any kind of channel than it had to have meant to Santos / DeVolder. And it's just like, that's what makes it, it's like just crazy. It's like, it's only $3,000.
Right. It makes you think, how many more people has this happened to? I mean, we're
apparently
story
a lot.
after story. But if he's scamming homeless veterans for $3,000, and we also still have no idea how that money was dropped into his DeVolder LLC or whatever. There's so many more layers that we haven't even reached at this point.
I can only imagine what he used the money for. He probably used it to like buy a potato gun to shoot at an orphanage or something. Just like real messed up cartoon shit. Like he's becoming he's getting a cartoon like Captain Planet suit made to start becoming a pollution villain. Like who knows? Like
I know he really, to bring it back to Velma, he is the villain that they could have used to tie it back to Scooby-Doo in that show. It seems like. And
also the thing with it, what's also absolutely wild is like, there's obviously now basically a cottage industry of like clips of Santos literally having to like find his way through the labyrinthine halls of the Capitol to try to avoid answering a single question from reporters, which, I mean, if it's any consolation, he'll have to deal with for literally every single day of his life until he resigns from Congress or gets arrested and has to resign. When he was reached for comment about this, he responded with two sentences: fake, I don't even know the guy. Does it seem fake to this guy?
Yeah,
I mean, the reports found the cache of the GoFundMe link that like came with the embed and everything. Like it existed. Like it's the real deal.
It's been verified by NBC News. It was a local paper patch, big scoop by the local reporter, by the way, and then it's been confirmed by national outlets. So
I want to know.
Really hard to fake.
I want to know. This seems small bore, but I think it probably could get you more information about the broader, whatever was going on in his scams. Who was this New Jersey vet tech that recommended his group? Why did that person recommend this group? Were they in on the scam too? Is there something broader going on here? Also, why that Queens or Long Island vet did? Because that's very weird that the New Jersey vet tech would say, go to this charity, and that charity would then refuse to work with that vet. It doesn't make any sense. Something is off here. There was something more going on there.
Yeah, there's. I also wonder, like, GoFundMe is the filling like fault lines in U.S. healthcare systems all the time, and being used by people who are desperate, and society should be footing the bill, and yet they have to crowdfund for those purposes. And I just wonder how common this is with people getting scammed through.
Oh, they changed their whole their entire like rules and policies in recent years, well after this, unfortunately, where like if you start a charity, if you start a fundraiser for someone else, then GoFundMe does not release the money to you. They make sure they release that money to the person it ostensibly was raised for. I think one of the big things that helped push that one was, you remember that big story where this couple hired a homeless person to like help like they ran, their car ran out of gas, and a homeless person came up to them to help them out, like to help get the gas for them from the station or whatever, something like that. And so they took it to social media and they raised like $1 million or hundreds of thousands of dollars for this homeless person. And then it came out that this couple actually hired the homeless person to make up this whole story and work with him. And then they didn't tell him how much they raised. So they could only pay him like a couple $100 while they walked away with the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Yeah. So even like it was a scam within a scam. Like they conspired with a homeless guy to scam social media people out of money. And then they scammed the homeless guy over how much they actually raised and like didn't pay him what they agreed to, or only paid him like a percentage that was much less than they agreed to or something like that.
That's nuts. All right,
This is
guys,
just
we are
wild.
not going to have enough time. Sorry for any more calls. I apologize. We're just going to read some IMs and get out of here. Fierce Deity, even if Santos had reimbursed the guy, that's not even really how charities work. A real charity would have just given the guy the money as soon as they got in contact with him and set up a GoFundMe and put off the operation for multiple months. Not set up a GoFundMe and put off, their teeth, OMG. I once saw a video of a homeless person sitting near a park with their dog. Then you see a few people holding the homeless person and another person grabbed the dog and took it away to give the dog a better home. BS, that's insane. Dave from Jamaica. Santos, 99% grifter, 1% human. Yeah. Snarkinorsky. I think the Santos story about scamming the veteran with the sick dog is the most damaging. There's a reason the Bible story with David, Bethesda, Uriah, the Hittite, and the prophet Nathan resonates. Animal stories can be really powerful to people when even human stories don't reach them. Charlie
I think the 9/11 one might really do it in for him, honestly. If he's representing area of Long Island, New York, I mean, we're talking.
All cops live there.
Yeah, yeah,
they do live there. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think that we're going to get so overwhelmed with his scam. We're going to have so many scams from him that's going to be impossible to keep track, and that's what he's just going to overwhelm people with it. Like it's going to by the time you
get the Trump effect, yeah. Congressional baseball fan. In many ways, we all died on 9/11. We are in an alternate reality timeline. Evil. Addressing a major threat to democracy in Ohio, the state has gone from swing state to solid red state due to gerrymandering, and they are continuing to push laws to take power away from citizens. There's a state-level group called Rank the Vote Ohio that's partnering with Rank the Vote National to help push ranked choice voting in Ohio. They are reaching out to volunteers and starting to grow their effort, just spreading the word and trying to get more visibility. This is a completely nonpartisan effort. There are Dems, GOP, Forward, and independent people in it. Also, thank you for introducing me to ranked choice voting. There you go. All right, like 5 more. Libtardo1. My work is hiring outside consultants to determine who to fire, and I'm expected to provide the data to these consultants. Is there anything I can do?
I did the numbers, and there's no one to fire.
This is just like the old. I wouldn't say you should lie. Not that I can know this is not financial or legal advice, but if it's not going to hurt anyone, you should always just lie. Yeah. I think that's the ultimate effect of like the whole like you don't use Chat GPT to cheat on your papers at school. It's just you just develop this kind of like integrity that's like, can I lie to my boss? And it's like, of course you can.
Yes, you
can. You're not going to be legally liable for it. Yeah. Go nuts.
According to my analysis, the CEO has been a real drain on the company. We should really let him go.
Iowan Ryan, my stepson had meningitis recently. He's 16 and with a lot of pain. I told him to cry if he needs to. He started crying almost immediately. I got emotional myself, thinking he was suffering and wanted to look tough or whatever. Tough people cry. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, that's also, when you see people cry, a lot of people have empathy. And I think that's one of the issues Candace Owen doesn't want to feel empathetic. So when she sees someone's cry, along with the uncomfortableness of like masculinity, it's also like, well, I don't want to feel what they feel. And that's just that's super antisocial.
Fierce Deity, if they made an NFT out of Lou Gehrig's I'm the luckiest man on earth speech, I'm sure they made one out of the I have a dream speech. Oh God, they did that? Dan from Missouri. Missouri Republicans in the State House passed a rule banning women from showing their arms in the State House chamber. I guess it was mostly due to some bickering between a Dem and a Republican over a new rule to require women to wear blazers. Just wanted to make sure you weren't missing these critical pieces of legislation that our best and brightest are working up in Jeff City. I mean, it's just like, that's just misogyny. It's like the same thing with double standards with even high school or middle school dress codes and stuff like that. Just regardless. The custodial artist Emma could, well, I already read that. Snark out Orsky, Emma, you ask such good questions of your guests. They're intelligence specific and designed to guide the conversation. It's so much better than interviews who say, talk about X. Well done, and thank you for the great work. Thank you. Though I do that from time to time. Mark Monkey, to the guy trying to put data together to get people fired, aim for the people at the top and show how their mismanagement has destroyed the work culture and company. That's kind of what Binder and Brandon were saying. And the final IM of the day, Matt Leck Door Voice. I think GoFundMe scams are more common than we expect. I was scammed personally by a friend I knew. He claimed he had cancer after he moved out of town. He got like $11,000.
Oh man!
Wow.
I mean, that's rough. It's tough because like some of the people, like there's a lot of people who are going there in desperation, and some people are making stuff up to try to do that, and it's brutal. That and again, like the context for that is set by leaders of this country who don't want people to have healthcare as like a right.
Yeah.
I think that there was like and this is real quick, there was like a wave of like fake GoFundMe spam on Twitter a while ago that, was eventually replaced, at least in my mentions, by, a wave of like fake crypto stuff. And I think that's just the ultimate probably type of fraud that exists on that website. Not necessarily people defrauding other people, but, ultimately, I don't know what GoFundMe does to verify that they should, but a lot of people just rely on the fact that that our society is uneven, that there are a lot of people who have fallen into poverty, a lot of people have fallen into like desperation, and they use that to craft a story for themselves that they know people can't and won't feel comfortable looking into, because on the left, we definitely respect people's privacy or try to, and it just becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like, you don't want to be a kind of person who can't trust anything you see when someone asks for help, but certainly we have the George Santoses out there who know that society sucks and want to use that to enrich themselves.
Although I should say that faking cancer crosses class lines. It was done by a husband on Real Housewives of Orange County. He faked hospital documents to make it clear that he was to say that he had cancer, which was not the case. And that was the subject of much
just for sympathy, or did he get money from it?
I wasn't that into the OC. I forget, but I might start watching it just to get the full story. But either way, just some trivia for you. All right, guys, thanks so much. Great show today. Check out Velma. Just kidding. Check out Doomed. Check out Scam Economy. Check out Left Reckoning. Check out The Discourse, and then ESVN in like an hour and 15 minutes. YouTube.com/ESVN show. Appreciate you all. See you next week, guys, and see you tomorrow, everybody else.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in.